Chapter 417. Kill him. I've already killed him. Du Shaoqing held the mini-communicator and sent out orders to the Black MX mecha, which had already escaped from the valley. In less than half a minute, the Black MX mecha in the distance gave a clear and forceful response. These two simple sentences made the expressions of everyone in the Iron 7th Division on the peak change drastically. The officers knew very well that the person in the Moonwolf 4th Gen mecha was the Empire's ace pilot, Love. Facing such a strong opponent, could it be that the Black MX only used such a short amount of time to end the mecha battle and kill the opponent? At this moment, the conversation between the commander and Su Le still seemed to be echoing in the quiet peak, reverberating in their ears. Everything happened so quickly that the officers couldn't react in time. They looked at the commander in the command center in shock as he turned on the high-powered battlefield communicator. Shimin Jin had been carefully monitoring the Empire's mecha group outside the valley. The relevant tactical simulations had already been completed. All the combat units under the command of the division knew the tactical details of this ambush by heart. He shouldn't be so nervous, but this was the first time the Iron 7th Division was on the battlefield. A real battlefield was very different from a mock battle. Furthermore, the backup assault team of the Imperial Expeditionary Force had more than 10,000 people, and they were already on their way. There wasn't much time left for the Iron 7 Masters. Fortunately, the Black MX was able to kill the Imperial Mecha Captain cleanly behind the mountain with a few simple words. Compared to his colleagues, he woke up faster. This was because he had seen how terrifying the MX under the control of Su Le was when he was at the bottom of the Blue Pond Valley on planet S1. Looking at the back of her teacher, Shimin Jin's heart surged with a trace of complicated emotions. This kind of emotion was not because Su Le had killed the Empire's ace mech pilot in seconds, but because of the extremely concise conversation between her teacher and Su Le from the commander to the most common soldier in the Iron 7th Division. No one liked the young lieutenant colonel who had joined the army halfway. Su Le believed that he didn't have a good impression of the Iron 7th Division either. However, Du Shaoqing did not even give it a second thought before handing over the crucial task of luring the Empire's mecha fleet into the valley to the other party. Su Le didn't even think about it before agreeing to it and completing it in an extremely efficient manner. What did this mean? This represented absolute trust and confidence. Division Commander Shaoqing had absolute confidence in Su Le's abilities, and Su Le also had absolute confidence in Du Shaoqing's military judgment. Furthermore, he believed that a model soldier like Du Shaoqing would never harm his comrades on the battlefield. That was why he did not hesitate to turn around and take a huge risk to kill a person for the Iron 7th Division. This kind of trust did not happen between brothers who had gone through life and death together. It happened between two people who were natural opposites and had a deep hatred for each other. The meaning behind this was very moving. Du Shaoqing did not care about what his subordinates were thinking. He waved his hand with a cold expression on his face and signaled the troops to start preparing. Then, he connected to the battlefield high-power communication system and said into the sound receiver, "Love is dead." He spoke the Empire language, a very standard Empire language. Since a long time ago, the entire Iron 7th Division had started training in this area because they knew that one day they would have to go to the front line and deal with the Empire people face to face. In the division headquarters, Du Shaoqing's voice was calm and deep. However, in the next moment, a loud voice suddenly rang out from the countless mountains and valleys along the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge. Love is dead. The Federation's battlefield communication system transmitted this sentence through the high-power loudspeaker. The loud voice resounded through the mountains and shattered the quiet night sky of the southern hemisphere. It was clearly transmitted to the Imperial Moonwolf group that was on alert and waiting for reinforcements at the edge of the valley. Almost at the same time, in the dark valley, following Du Shaoqing's cold voice, countless bright light beams lit up. In the crevices of the mountains and in the rock formations, the high-brightness searchlights that the Iron 7th Division had set up in advance instantly lit up the entire sky and the valley. The dark yellow rock surface of the mountain finally showed its true color under the bright light. The Imperial Moonwolf group outside the valley was illuminated by the bright light and couldn't hide. On the gentle slope of the valley, The federal military's mountain grenade launchers also took off their disguise. Countless composite armored vehicles and armed infantry of the Federation revealed themselves and aimed at the hundreds of third-generation Moonwolf mechas from the Empire. The air strike force of the Empire and the Federation was on the third line of defense in the Southern Hemisphere right now. They were chasing each other at high speed like streams of light, providing support for the extremely cruel offensive and defensive bloody battle on the ground. There was no way for them to provide support. Therefore, the Iron 7th Division actually gave up on the usual flares and chose to use searchlights to illuminate the sky and the ground at the same time. The iron-blooded commander of the Iron 7th Division gave up on the ambush at the last moment of the battle without hesitation. He chose to annihilate the enemy head-on. It was just a matter of whether the Empire people dared to come. Because of the searchlights, this valley became a bright concert stage, just like the concert called Victory a few hours ago. There was no countdown, no yelling orders, only silence. The bright searchlights lit up countless mountain peaks. Countless armored vehicles and soldiers of the Federation appeared in the valley. Then, countless cannons roared and fired at the Empire mechas outside the valley. The lights were very bright, but it wasn't unbearable. The appearance of the Federation's ambush in the valley ahead was already within the Empire's tactical calculations. Therefore, even though the Empire soldiers saw the dense crowd of armored vehicles and soldiers of the Federation charging over, they were still able to maintain their calm. Even under the whistling and sharp barrage of cannons, they were confident that their high-speed mechas would be able to avoid most of the damage. What really made the Empire soldiers shiver was the voice at the beginning, that sentence. They didn't know that the person who spoke was the commander of the Federation's Iron 7th Division, Du Shaoqing, but because of the content of that sentence, they felt extremely cold. Is the commander dead? Colonel Lov's domineering and rough voice didn't ring in the communication system of the Empire mechas. All the Empire officers, including the 3 squadron leaders, felt an extremely dangerous omen in their hearts. They knew that the Federation wasn't lying. At this time, the first wave of cannons from the Iron 7th Division had already arrived. Scatter and evade. The first squadron leader of the Moonwolf group ordered in a deep voice. 104 green-black Moonwolf mecha, with a whoosh, followed the forest outside the valley and began to perform high-speed evasive maneuvers. Even though they were shocked to the point of disbelief by the extremely terrifying news, these Empire pilots still calmly and precisely completed each of their maneuvers, dispersing with extreme speed towards the wild forest behind the valley. The movements of the Empire's mechas were so clean and precise. It felt like a balloon filled with many glass beads that suddenly exploded. All the glass beads inside the balloon sputtered everywhere. Every mecha maintained an extremely suitable distance from each other.
Boom, boom, boom.
The dense cannons of the Iron 7th Division landed horribly on the ground. The bombardment caused the entire ground to tremble. Tons of soil were blown up and scattered. Trees were burned and fell. Giant rocks were shattered. However, the Empire's mechas used their high mobility to avoid most of the direct damage. The mechas in black and green quickly left the dense cannons and hid behind the mountains and giant trees. Using these natural shelters, they blocked the first wave of cannons from the Federation. Right now, there were 2 paths in front of the Moonwolf group. The first was to give up on the 10 mechas that had already rushed past the valley, including their commander, Love. They would immediately retreat and leave the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge area. As long as the mechas increased their speed, the Federation's ambush team wouldn't be able to catch up with them. The second path was to attack the valley and weaken the Federal Army's combat power at all costs. They would avenge their commander and delay the Federal Army for the Empire's assault team. In fact, an entire mecha team did have this ability. Although the valley area was convenient for ambushes, once the mechas broke in, their high mobility would be the nightmare of the Federation's mechanical army. Commander, 17 mechas are slightly damaged. Only 2 mechas have lost their mobility. The smoke and flames that filled the sky outside the valley, as well as the violent explosions there, had become much quieter by the time they reached the peak. However, Shimin-jin's voice was still very loud.
Got it.
Du Shaoqing had a cold expression on his face. He silently looked at the trembling ground under his feet. He looked at his subordinates who were bravely charging in the mountains. He was very satisfied with this terrible result. Iron's 7th Division's first round of cannon fire didn't cause any real damage to the Empire's high-speed mechas. On the contrary, it gave the Empire's soldiers a strong sense of confidence. According to the calculation of firepower, there was indeed only one Federation mechanic in the mountains. How could a division be able to stop their iron stream charge? Between the two completely opposite paths, the Moonwolf group chose the latter without hesitation. The shock and pain caused by Commander Lov's death turned into courage and bravery. 100 black and green mechas instantly broke through the thick fog of gunpowder and charged into the valley. The iron stream charge rushed in, stirring up a frenzied cloud of dust. The collective charge of the heavy mechas looked so unstoppable that even the mountains under the searchlights started to tremble. High mobility, powerful firepower, and a mecha design that was extremely suitable for mountainous warfare turned the Moonwolf group into a ferocious mountain-splitting axe. They viciously chopped down on the encirclement of Iron's 7th Division. Countless dull sounds of metal clashing rang out in the valley. The sound of bullets and cannons shook the sky. The Empire's mechas were like countless black shadows, moving freely in the front line of Iron's 7th Division. They were ferocious and incomparably sharp. In an instant, they continuously charged forward a distance of 700 meters. In front of this kind of iron stream charge, the slow tanks and armed infantry couldn't react at all. In the process of charging forward, the Moonwolf group's advantage in speed was displayed to the extreme. Find their M52s, closely monitor the activation frequency of the anti-mecha mine array. The company leader's Moonwolf mecha fiercely shot out a rain of bullets, turning the Federation soldiers 100 meters away into pools of blood. At this time, there were countless flames of anger in his heart. He only wanted to help the main team behind him delay this Federation division, but he didn't let down his guard. The headquarters of Iron's 7th Division, Shimin-jin's expression was solemn as she looked at the rising casualty count. Finally, she couldn't help but look at her division commander. Du Shaoqing wore sunglasses and sat silently on a large rock. He looked at the tragic battlefield below. Looking at the fierce yet cautious Empire's mechas breaking into the ambush circle, he knew that the enemy's backup commander hadn't truly gone crazy. He opened his mouth and said, "Wait a little longer." Shimin-jin's heart tightened. It should be known that every second they waited, more of their comrades would die. What my division commander needs now is time. He must succeed in one strike. We can't let this pile of mechas drag on until the 10,000 people behind us arrive. Du Shaoqing slowly closed his eyes under the sunglasses and said, "Only victory and defeat, not life and death. This is war." Chapter 418. The tongues of flame that shot out from the front of the mechanical arms of the black and green mecha were actually high-speed and sharp bullets. They hit the cliffs of the valley and splashed out countless fragments. 3 Federation soldiers hiding behind the hidden fortifications were hit and fell to the ground. In just a moment, the 3 fresh corpses were turned into cloth bags filled with bright red material. Tongues of flame sprayed out everywhere. Countless amounts of soil were flipped up, and the tanks were set ablaze. Amidst the continuous and terrifying sounds of machine guns, the sturdy base at the bottom of the mountain was riddled with holes. Blood and broken limbs flew everywhere. The most terrifying thing was the mobility of these black and green mecha. Under the crazy barrage of the Federation's mountain howitzers, most of them still managed to survive. The Empire's mecha group was like a pack of tireless grassland wolves. They cruelly and crazily rushed into the ambush area of the Iron 7th Division. They bared their sharp fangs and bit viciously at the Federation's base. Then, using the fastest speed possible, they changed their formation and broke into smaller groups. Taking advantage of the occasional collapse of the Iron 7th Division's front line, they split into a dozen small groups and spread out in all directions. Following the natural water line and gentle slope of the valley, they launched a second charge. Screeching sounds rang out. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division hidden in the mountains had been silently and resolutely counterattacking. The bullets fired by the Federation's 21-26 sniper rifle hit several Empire mecha. However, they only left light gray marks and dense dents on the sturdy alloy armor. One of the Imperial mechs raised its right arm and fired its main cannon at a 32-degree angle. Along with a heavy roar, the powerful cannon fire didn't hit the target. Instead, it hit the quick-solidifying concrete structure of the fortification. The explosion caused the quick-solidifying concrete to shatter and splatter in all directions. Of the 5 Federation soldiers hiding in the fortification, 4 were instantly crushed to death by the rocks. Blood flowed out along the remnants of the explosion and the cracks between the rocks. There was still one soldier who did not die immediately. The helmet he was wearing blocked most of the high-speed rocks, but his goggles had been shattered. He screamed in pain, and his face was covered in blood and exposed muscles. In the last moment of his life, he raised the MP5 submachine gun in his hand and fired nonstop at the foot of the mountain. Both of his eyes were blinded, and blood was flowing down his face. The submachine gun in his hands was shooting out flames, but it was aimless. He couldn't hit the black-green mecha in front of him at all. The next moment, he missed a step and fell down the cliff. The Empire's black and green mecha coldly watched the scene. Without any hesitation, it continued to charge forward along the gentle slope. But from the side, a ponytail-heavy rocket fired over with a whoosh, accurately hitting the side of the mecha's abdomen. After the loud explosion, there was a dull sound of metal parts rubbing against each other. The outer armor of the Empire's mecha's engine was severely damaged, and its power output was occasionally affected. Its originally high-speed movement mode was suddenly slowed down. It was only delayed for a moment, and 7 or 8 precision-guided rockets from the Federation flew at high speed from all directions at the same time, hitting the heavy and huge body of the mecha. The sound of the explosion and the blinding light kept flashing. This Empire's mecha was burnt black, and its parts were severely damaged. Its balance was completely disabled, and it fell down the cliff in a tragic manner, turning into a pile of alloy garbage. Just like that Federation soldier just now, such a tragic scene of a battlefield appeared below the Yellow Mountain Ridge, below the lonely mountain ridge. The wolf pack of the Empire's mecha brigades spread out at high speed. Wherever they charged, battle would break out there. Tragic scenes could be found everywhere. Every Federation soldier who had died in the mountains actually had a life story that belonged to them. However, at this moment, there was no extra time to reflect on it, to sigh with emotion, because this was a battlefield. This was war. Today's ambush was the first time the Iron 7 Division had been on the battlefield. Facing the ruthless and crazed mecha of the Empire, feeling the explosions of fireworks in the valley, hearing the familiar cries of pain around them, and seeing the shattered and burning corpses of their comrades lying between the rocks and cliffs, they finally understood that the battlefield was not a drill. Their dead comrades wouldn't be able to stand in front of them again just by removing the death indicator on their bodies like before. Under the high-speed charge of the Empire's mecha, the first line of the Iron 7th Division's ambush was showing signs of chaos and even being defeated. No matter how strict Du Shaoqing's management was and how calm his command was, after all, an army was made up of people, not real machines. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division were as firm and unyielding as their commander, Shaoqing. However, their fingers would get tired when they used the armor-piercing heavy machine guns. They would tremble, they would cry, they would laugh, and they would feel pain. And now they were even a little confused and scared. But they were the Iron 7th Division after all. The Iron 7th Division, the trump card of the Federation, had never lost in military exercises for 10 years. After 10 years, they had returned to the West Woods, to the front line, to the 5460. How could they be defeated by fear? With their pride, their perseverance, how could they allow themselves to be defeated? The soldiers of the 3rd Regiment of the Iron 7th Division, who were in charge of the first line of ambush, finally exploded at the most critical moment. They stood up from the cliff, wiped the ash off their faces, endured the pain from their wounds, and ignored the high-speed Empire's mecha charging towards them. Using the corpses of their comrades who had died under the Empire's alloy blades as motivation, they roared and launched their counterattack. The bravery of the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division wasn't enough to change the situation on the battlefield. An Imperial mech squad originally had the ability to fight head-on with an entire Federation division. Plus, this was an ambush battle in the middle of a mountain range. The high mobility of the Imperial mech squad gave them a natural advantage. In fact, if the Federation's Ministry of Defense didn't misjudge the type of Imperial armies that were attacking them, then the Iron 7th Division's choice of location for the ambush would definitely have a deeper meaning. The fierce battle quickly spread out from the entrance of the mountain valley in all directions. In order to avoid the coverage of the Federation's mountain grenades, the Empire's mecha squad had to spread out in all directions. They also had the ability to complete this kind of spread-out battle. Looking at the red smoke under Silent Hill in the distance, Shimin-Jin put down her electronic binoculars. Her mood was very bad. One of the Empire's mecha squad had already rushed past the anti-mecha mine formation. Although the turbulent explosion had a good effect, it didn't cause any fatal damage to the enemy. Plus, with the high speed of the Empire's mecha, the Federation's rocket launchers didn't have much of an effect. If the Ministry of Defense could distribute ACWs, the 3rd Division wouldn't have to fight so hard. The Federal Army's normal anti-material sniper rifle couldn't cause fatal damage to the 3rd-generation mecha of the Empire, unless the ACWs were paired with high-rotation speed tungsten alloy armor-piercing bullets. However, that legendary big gun was too expensive to make. Even if the Ministry of Defense's General Assembly base wanted to, the Budget Committee of Parliament Hill couldn't approve it. The division headquarters was dead silent. The officers were working hard in front of their workstations. No one dared to look at the division commander sitting at the back. Faced with the ferocious attacks of the Empire's mecha fleet, the Iron 7 Division had only sent out 1 regiment so far. Even the amount of ammunition they had was limited to 1/3 of the original limit. No one knew what the division commander was thinking. Du Shaoqing sat silently in his chair. His hands, which were wearing lambskin gloves, rested on his knees. No one seemed to have expected that the youngest Major General of the Federation, who was highly valued by the President and the military, was also stepping onto a real battlefield for the first time. In the eyes of the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division, Division Commander Shaoqing was like a god. There was no way he would make a mistake. So, at this moment, no one noticed that the veins at the corner of his eyes were popping under his sunglasses. The federal military's plan on this planet was to cast a net. They would use Jianshuier as bait to lure the Empire's people to the south. Then they would use the Westwood's army on the dividing line between the north and the south to pull the net north. They would trap the Imperial Expeditionary Force's Maple Forest Alliance. Then, they would use the Iron 7th Division to tie the last rope. But old General Ambly of the Empire obviously didn't see through this was a trap. He didn't know why, but from the very beginning, he launched a fierce attack on the dividing line between the north and south, tearing the Federation's net into pieces. In this way, the rope that was the Iron 7th Division had to face the surprise attack of the Imperial Mech Squad and the Assault Brigade. It should be known that the combat power of a mech squad was already terrifying. Not to mention, the size of the Imperial Assault Group was even bigger than a division of the Federation. The rope became the bottom of the net, without any cloth covering it. The mission of the Iron 7th Division was extremely difficult. Westgate, more than half of the Empire's mechas on this planet are under our watch. It's already very good that the Iron 3rd Division is doing so well. Du Shaoqing calmed down. Because of the current situation, he had to take down all 100 Empire's mechas in the shortest amount of time and at the lowest cost. No, now there were only 86 mechas left. Only then would the Iron 7th Division be able to deal with the Imperial Assault Group that was about to arrive. That was why the Iron 7th Division had been suppressing most of their firepower since the start of the battle. They had to lure the crazy Empire's mechas into the depths of the battlefield and make it impossible for them to escape. However, The Iron 7th Division had to pay the smallest price, while the soldiers on the front line had to pay the heaviest price. Waveband appeared. Waveband appeared. The electronic alarm of the Empire's mechas rang out in the internal communication network of the Empire's mechas.
Boom, 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 boom.
The Federation's anti-mecha lightning arrays buried in the mountains all exploded. The earth trembled as a result, and the valleys turned yellow as a result. Magnificent smoke and streams of light continued to linger in the night sky that seemed to be burning red. The Empire's mechas that had already scattered into formations scattered once again. Like countless balloons that had been blown apart, they became even smaller balloons. The leader of the first company of the Moonwolf Group looked at the magnificent explosion behind him through his vision. After confirming that there were still around 80 mechas that were fine, his confidence increased again. However, he was still a little worried about his leader's life. Leader Lov was a hero of his generation. He wanted to capture the Federation's MX mecha alive, but he was killed by the MX mecha. Could it be that the Federation's new MX mecha were really that terrifying? Fortunately, the Federation didn't have the ability to mass-produce them yet. Just as the company leader was thinking this, his pupils suddenly shrank. Chapter 419. This was a battlefield, this was a war, this was not a stage play, this was not a deliberate climax, this was a sudden effect deliberately planned by Du Shaoqing. It was like a flash of lightning changing the shape of the sky, like a fire igniting the screen of a cinema, suddenly appearing, shocking the mecha of the Empire. They couldn't help but tremble. They suddenly felt the shadow of death. They didn't want to die, but they suddenly felt the shadow of death. The black and green mechas scattered across the wide mountainous area. The Empire's mechas that once showed their powerful mobility in the first wave of attack, showing off their ferocity and ruthlessness, at the foot of the Yellow Mountain Ridge, at the foot of the lonely mountain ridge, under the huge yellow rock, under the burning debris, all of them froze on the spot like their platoon leader, because they all realized that there was one or more black mechas in front of them. The Black Federation mecha didn't look very strong, but as the people of the Empire always said, judging a book by its cover was the road to death. A slender body didn't mean that it was delicate, not to mention that these mechas looked so familiar. Just like 2 hours ago, they kept running under their eyes, but they could never catch up with that mecha. Mechs. Federation's MX, a single mecha, was a terrifying killing machine, and a group of 100 mechas was an alloy flow that was hard to resist. Even an entire mechanic would find it hard to resist their high-speed, agile, and ruthless battle style. What was this terrifying group of Empire's mechas afraid of? Cannon formation? There wouldn't be any in the mountainous area. High-speed missile launch? The missile bases of both sides were firing with all their might, but those missiles that were rampaging in the night sky were miserably flying back and forth in the air above the dividing line between the north and the south. Fighter jets attacking the ground? The Federation's fighter jets were fighting with the Empire's Nightwolf fleet at Seichio Airport, and they also had to closely guard the sky above Luoqiu Airport. At the front line between the Yellow Mountain Ridge and the Lonely Mountain Ridge, at this moment in the middle of the night, what was the Imperial Mech Squad afraid of? In fact, the platoon leader knew very well that the enemy of the military mechas could only be the military mechas. At this moment, unless the Federation sent out a group of M-Series Federation mecha to deal with him, the Empire's mecha squad would obtain the final victory. But how could a mere Federation mecha operator have so many M52 mechas? It should be known that in that society that was all about bullshit elections, there was no such thing as a full mecha operator. The platoon leader's thoughts stopped there, the Federation mecha operators in the valley, but these black mechas that appeared between the mountains and the giant rocks. What were they? A black light flashed, and 3 black mechas from the Federation mechas flew across the sky and rushed downwards. The first of the Federation of mechas, the Empire, and the first of the Federation of the Federation, and then collapsed under the 3 continuous 3 attacks amidst the deafening boom. The Empire's dark green mecha tumbled down the mountain like a piece of metal before exploding abruptly. Everyone was stunned. This was mainly referring to the pilots of the Empire's Moon Wolf mecha team. They had already confirmed the death of Captain Love. However, right after that, they stared in shock at the captain of the first squadron. Like a rubber ball, he was kicked down the hill by the Federation's mecha and turned into a ball of fire with a chilling aura. MX. Be careful. It's the Federation's MX. In the internal communication system of the Empire Mecha Squad, sharp, angry, and desperate screams rang out. They were not afraid of ambushes, nor were they afraid of the Federation's Iron 7th Division's so-called tactics, but suddenly faced with the new Federation mecha that completely overwhelmed them. Finally, they felt fear. Not all of the Empire mecha were like their poor captain, facing 3 black Federation mecha MX alone. The more common situation was when a black mecha stood up silently in front of 3 or 4 Empire Moonwolf MX 3rd generation mechas. The Federation mecha tore off its yellow cloth disguise and stood up silently and coldly. It suddenly appeared, but it was as if it was a stream from the north of this planet. From the peak of the mountain, between the rocks and below the valley, it charged at high speed and viciously pierced into the Empire Mecha Squad that had already scattered into countless small teams. More than 20 black mecha shadows suddenly burst out and spread out in all directions. The heavy mecha's rapid footsteps made the rocks in the valley fly up into the air. The sound of cannons, alloy knives cutting through the air, and explosions rang out one after another in this battle zone that was dozens of kilometers in radius. Flames, gunfire, and main cannons continuously lit up the entire sky and countless remote corners. The most common scene on the battlefield was a black Federation mecha MX charging into the small team formation of 3 Empire Moonwolf MX 3rd generation mechas, as if it didn't care about its own life. In just a short few seconds, more than 10 mechas were destroyed, and flames rose into the sky. All of the Moonwolf Group's pilots could see that these Federation mecha MX that had been in hiding for a long time were obviously not as strong as the black MX from before. However, no matter if it was instantaneous speed, fire control system, or everything else, the black MX that the Federation had hidden in ambush was ahead of their own mecha in every aspect, and it was hard for their own mecha to retaliate. Even if it was 1 against 3, or even 1 against 4, it was still the same. Iron 7th Division's long-awaited lightning-fast attack began with the lightning strikes of the 20 black MX mechas. Loud explosions rang out in the vast valley from time to time, and clouds of smoke rose into the night sky. No one knew how many Empire mechas had tragically exploded in this short period of time. The low humming sound of engines rang out again under the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge. Countless composite armors and strong firepower troops swarmed out of the seemingly empty fortifications and valley like a swarm of ants. Like flowing water, they spread out and rushed in all directions along the valley's terrain. All of the Iron 7th Division's regiments and all of the long-range firepower troops poured out in torrents, and their momentum shook the heavens. The strongest firepower unit of the Iron 7 Division, which had been in hiding until now, didn't participate in the mecha battle at the center of the battlefield. The soldiers drove the war chariots, leading the concentrated firepower base, and drove out of the valley with stern expressions. The mecha battle at the center of the battlefield was already in full swing. More than 20 Federation MX mecha were entangled with an entire mecha clan of the Empire like scattered bubbles, sharing life and death with each other, loving each other, unable to be separated. Iron 7th Division's firepower formation that hadn't been activated all this time couldn't carry out any long-range attacks at all. In the high-speed mecha battle that looked like streams of light, any coverage from the firepower would hurt their own MX mechas. In reality, Iron 7th Division didn't have the intention to carry out any long-range attacks at all. Countless mechanical troops passed by the burnt fortifications, past the corpses of their comrades, and silently walked into the distance. Nearly 10,000 Federation soldiers and the most advanced tanks used the shortest amount of time to seal off the valley around the battlefield. The majestic Iron 7th Division didn't care about the intense mecha battle at the center of the valley at all. They began to change their formation. Accompanied by the low and frightening rumbling sounds of engines, one regiment even left the battlefield and entered the edge of the wild forest outside the valley in the northwest direction. 4 regiments silently took up their respective positions and aimed all of their firepower control equipment at the night, at the Imperial Assault Group that was about to arrive. 4 mecha divisions drove away from their positions at high speed and followed the military path at the bottom of the valley to seal off the 4 exits of the valley battlefield. They began to quickly and nervously set up a pomegranate cannon formation. Looking at the deployment of these troops, it seemed like they wanted to seal off all of the exits of this mountainous battlefield. The Mecha Division soldiers in the northwest direction, who were responsible for using their own lives and cannon fire to seal off the exits, didn't even have time to complete their orders before they saw 7 heavily damaged Empire Moonwolf 3rd-generation mechas turn into streams of light and fly past their positions. Battalion Commander. All of the Federation soldiers thought that they had made an unforgivable mistake, but they immediately relaxed. This was because a Black Federation MX mecha was chasing closely behind the 7 damaged Empire mecha, whistling through the air as it chased after them. Forcefully seal off all signals for 3 minutes. Don't worry about your own command system. I want the Empire people to not make a single sound in these 3 minutes. I don't need any command right now. The troops at all levels will do as they see fit. Fight however you want. On a lonely mountain peak, the lonely Du Xiaoqing stood in front of the electronic map. Looking at the situation on the battlefield, he bowed slightly and said indifferently, I only want you to destroy all of these Empire mechas within 3 minutes. Yes, Commander. The MX mecha had completely suppressed the Empire mecha group at this time. Iron 7 Division's electronic troops had already begun their overflow attacks. Although the Empire's communications were completely blocked, Iron 7 Division's own battlefield commands were also completely ineffective. The officers couldn't understand this kind of military order, but they definitely accepted it. This was because they firmly believed that any order from Commander Xiaoqing had its own deeper meaning. When the Ministry of Defense drafted the plan for tonight, the Federation only had 230 MXs. Our Iron 7 Division, a division, took 1/10 of that. This is the absolute trust the President and the Ministry of Defense have in my division. Du Xiaoqing slowly straightened his body. Looking at the Black Federation MX mecha on the screen, he said, I never doubted that we would win this battle, but this victory is not enough. After saying this most outstanding young man of the Federation took off the sunglasses on his nose and rubbed the space between his eyebrows, looking slightly tired. Luring the Empire mecha group deep in, using horizontal fire and anti-mecha minefields to force the Empire mecha group to scatter, then sending the MX mecha out. 1 against 3, everything that happened on the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge battlefield was all within his calculations. If he had used the MX mecha group attack from the start, or if he had thrown in all of Iron 7 Division's forces, the Imperial Moonwolf group would have been utterly defeated, but there was always the possibility that a few mecha would have escaped. And he, Du Xiaoqing, didn't want any of these Empire mecha to survive and spread a single word. I have the MX. The stubborn enemy is helpless. However, not only did he want to take down this mecha brigade, he also wanted to give the Imperial Assault Group behind them a surprise. Outnumbered. And in this dangerous moment on the battlefield, he still had such ambition, such determination, and such fighting spirit. Other than the Iron 7 Division, other than this cold-faced Commander Xiaoqing, who else could it be? Chapter 420. At this moment, in the lonely mountains of the Yellow Mountain Ridge, more than 20 black mechas with a hint of elegance, but they were still heavy enough to crush the rock surface. They were jumping up and down, flames spurting out of their arms as they dodged at high speed, defeating the black and cyan mechas of the Empire one after another. A few months ago, the Shell Motor Company and the Ministry of National Defense had jointly produced more than 200 MX mecha. Naturally, there were more now, but they still needed to go through a series of pre-battle tests and adjustments. Right now, there were less than 100 mecha that could actually be used in battle. On Planet 5460, the Federation had invested 50 of them, and the Iron 7th Division had taken half of them. The standard MX mecha had only been officially set last year, and in just one short year, it had already been officially distributed to the frontline troops. This was the federal military's biggest secret and source of confidence. The Ministry of National Defense dared to set up such a situation for the Imperial Expeditionary Force on this border planet. Even though the early stages of the battle had been so tragic, the frontline command had still forcefully endured it, ignoring the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge for the sake of the bigger picture. It was also because of this. The Empire's mecha group had already been led into the center of the battlefield by the brave soldiers of the Iron 7th Division's 3rd Regiment. Faced with the sudden appearance of more than 20 high-performance MX mecha, the Empire's mecha group was on the verge of collapse. The secret of the MX mecha had been hidden until now, and finally achieved perfect results. However, Du Shaoqing still wanted to hide the secret for a while longer, all the way until the Imperial Expeditionary Forces Assault Brigade arrived. Any secret was like old wine. The longer it was hidden, the stronger the aroma of the wine, the more intoxicating it was, and the more it could kill. This intoxicating old wine could probably only make the Empire's people drunk tonight. Since that was the case, Du Shaoqing naturally wanted to drink to his heart's content. Du Shaoqing looked at the battle situation displayed on the screen. He looked at the 3rd generation mecha of the Empire that were retreating bit by bit, and looked at the troops that had already firmly held all the checkpoints. He confirmed that victory was already decided, but the solemn expression on his face did not disappear at all. He used his index finger and thumb to rub the space between his eyebrows until it was bright red. He lowered his head and said, "Use the reserve team to replace the 3rd group." After being startled for a moment, Shimin-Jin quickly nodded and used the fastest speed to pass down the order of the teacher. From the very beginning, this sniping battle in the mountainous region had become a proper battle for the Imperial Mech Squad. There was nothing strange about it, and there was no element of surprise. Iron 7th Division couldn't possibly surround the high-speed mecha swarm, but they also had to annihilate the enemy in this yellow mountain range. They had no choice but to resort to such a desperate strategy. The 3rd Regiment was the first unit to fire the first shot. In order to complete the tactical maneuvers of the entire division, this heroic unit had sacrificed too much blood and sacrificed too much. Relying on the strength and firepower of an entire regiment, they were able to hold off the Imperial Mech Squad for 10 minutes. It was truly a tough battle. Even Du Shaoqing, who only cared about winning and losing and didn't care about life and death, looked at the tragic state of his subordinates on the screen. Although his expression didn't change, his heart was already slightly tense. If an Iron Division didn't experience the baptism of blood and fire on the battlefield, how could it become a truly invincible division? Finally, they left the drill site of the capital ring and came to the bloody front line. The 3rd Regiment held on, while the other regiments watched with their eyes wide open. After being educated, Iron 7th Division went through the first test and knew what the battlefield was like. This was the inevitable process for a highly trained unit to become a truly invincible army. Du Shaoqing understood this, but he was not as calm as he appeared on the surface as he looked coldly at the battle losses. This was because this was also his first time on the battlefield. This was the first time he saw his subordinates fall and die one after another like rice flowers blown by the wind. He muttered to himself, "Du Shaoqing, you also received a shocking education. This is good, isn't it?" On the battlefield of the hills and valleys that were close to 20 square kilometers, the situation of the Imperial Moonwolf Group was very bad. It was very miserable. In just a short minute, more than 20 Moonwolf 3rd generation mechas were completely destroyed by the high-speed attacks of the Federation's black mechas. The scene of the black-green mechas burning and falling in the mountains around them, and the bright light of the explosions, made the Imperial pilot shocked to confirm that these 20 new Black Federation mechas completely suppressed the 3rd generation and even 4th generation mechas of the Empire in all aspects. It was clearly a situation where they had the advantage in numbers, but because of the terrifying performance of the Federation's black mechas, there was an absolute change in the situation. Many times, it even felt like one Black Federation MX was besieging 3 or even 4 Empire mechas. This was not a battle of equal strength at all. The captain of the 2nd Squadron of the Empire, who temporarily took over the position of commander, looked on in despair as the black-green mechas were buried in the mountains and valleys one after another, falling apart, but he could not find a way to deal with it. What made his heart even colder was that from the moment the 20 new Federation mechas appeared, extremely powerful electronic interference and noise echoes covered the entire mountainous battlefield. With such strength and wide range of electronic suppression, the Federal Army's own command system would definitely be completely paralyzed. The Federation people were betting such a huge price to not let their mechas send out a message. What was the reason? No matter how advanced the weapons were, no matter how desperate the situation of the battlefield was, it would not cause the unusually strong and cold soldiers of the Empire to have any thoughts of fear. But at this moment, thinking about the assault brigade that was rushing over from the back, this squadron captain suddenly woke up and shouted loudly in the communication system, "Retreat. Plum Blossom Formation. Disperse. Leave the battlefield." However, the encirclement was already set. How could Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7th Division let these Empire mechas escape and send out an emergency warning to the brigade behind them? Under the gentle slope of the mountain valley to the southwest, a Moonwolf 3rd generation mecha that had its right arm almost completely damaged crazily spat out flames as it charged down the slope with no regard for its life. This mecha was the closest to the entrance of the valley. Although it could clearly see that the Federal forces had already set up a dense artillery formation at the entrance of the valley 1 kilometer away, it still tried to charge over. No matter whether it lived or died after charging over, it had to leave the Federation's electronic coverage area and tell the brigade that was rushing over that the Federation people now had an extremely terrifying new mecha. They had to be careful.
Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh.
3 laser-guided rockets drilled out from between the dark mountain rocks and shot towards the black-green mecha. The mecha, whose balance system was severely damaged, could no longer maintain the high speed and mobility it had at the start of the battle. With great difficulty, it dodged twice, narrowly avoiding 2 of the rockets. However, the last laser-guided rocket struck the outer edge of the mecha's mechanical leg viciously. There was a flash of fire and an explosion. The Empire mecha crashed heavily to the ground. A moment later, the mecha forced itself to stand up again. Accompanied by the sound of friction between its alloy structure, it slowly but incomparably madly walked towards the entrance of the valley once more. The word walk could only be used because this mecha's speed was already indescribably slow. However, at this moment, 3 more rockets shot out from between the shadowy mountains. Like red dots, they bombarded the body of the gigantic mecha with unparalleled precision. The Empire mecha fell into the flames once more. When it stood up again, the body of the mecha had long been damaged. The charred gaps in the armor looked somewhat sinister. Countless metal components and wires hung pathetically around the mecha. It looked extremely scattered, as if it would fall apart into a pile of dust if it took one more step forward. In reality, this mecha that was closest to the entrance of the valley couldn't even take that step forward. Iron 7 Division's medium-range precision firepower covered its entire body. It was continuously hit, smashed, and then collapsed, unable to get up again. The remaining power of the engine made the body on the ground twitch incessantly like a dying insect. After a short 2.5 minutes, Iron 7 Division's focus shifted to the next battle. The officers' expressions were serious as they deployed the firepower positions. More than 10,000 Federation soldiers were scattered out of the mountains and even into the distant plains, preparing to welcome the Imperial assault group that was about to arrive. Du Shaoqing took a scalding hot towel from an orderly's hand and wiped his face vigorously. The hot steam couldn't melt his cold expression in the slightest. When he subconsciously looked at the close-up battlefield feed sent back by the monitoring equipment on the mountaintop, a complicated expression appeared on his face. In the center of the feed was a black MX mecha of the Federation. This mecha alone had attracted the attention of as many as 10 Empire mechas. Although this black MX didn't look any different from the MX equipped by Iron 7 Division, he still recognized the identity of the other mecha in the shortest amount of time. This was because this black MX didn't use any long-range fire control system. It only relied on the high RPM alloy knife to slaughter the 10 Empire mechas and force them to retreat again and again. That mech was like a bolt of black lightning, moving up and down like a bolt of lightning. Under the concentrated firepower of the third-generation mechs of the Empire, it actually managed to avoid most of the damage, advancing and retreating like a ghost. Every time the high-revving alloy blade extended out of its mechanical arm, sparks would fly out of the Empire's mech as it miserably retreated. If these 10 Empire mechas hadn't risked their lives to support each other, the Black MX would have destroyed most of them. Du Shaoqing had only seen 2 people in his life who could operate such a terrifying mecha. He narrowed his eyes at the screen and frowned slightly. He thought back to that time in the training base, when he and Su Lo had a tit-for-tat discussion in the twilight. Now it seemed that if his Iron 7 division had 20 Su Lis, no, even if he only had 10 Su Lis, 10 Black MXs, combined with conventional firepower, wouldn't it be easy to wipe out an Imperial mech squad? Perhaps the soldiers of the 3rd Regiment wouldn't have to pay such a terrible price? A moment later, he finally figured it out and reaffirmed his military philosophy. He thought to himself in a self-deprecating manner, there are only a few people in the universe, like Su Lo. Be it the Federation or the Empire, where can we steal 10 of them? For some reason, Su Lo, who had rushed back from afar to participate in this spectacular mecha battle, didn't know that the cold and callous teacher Shaoqing at the peak of the mountain had coincidentally decided to cherish his talent. At this moment, he was moving his hands at high speed in the cockpit with a pale face. Every pair of muscle fibers in his body were squeezing and rubbing against each other, transferring all the force to the MX. This made the mecha below him move faster, faster and faster. In the dense group of mecha, he moved at high speed like a ghost. Jian Shui's face was also pale, but her eyes were abnormally bright as she stared at the screen. Her hands were clenched tightly, and her voice trembled as she said, right again. Right again.
Su Lo was silent.
He thought to himself, this isn't a video game, so why hasn't this national girl fainted from fright? Chapter 421. Reporting to Commander, according to the real-time filtering data, the energy's second equivalent of the Northern Defense Line is rapidly decreasing. In the Southern Hemisphere Federation Command Hall, a staff officer picked up the results that the central computer had just calculated a second ago and reported excitedly. The so-called energy's second equivalent in the Federation's command system was a chaotic simulation term. This indicator, which was calculated by the Federal Central Computer at high speed, represented the energy difference in the monitoring area. Although the numerical value was not very accurate, it could clearly determine the strength of the Empire's firepower. Very good. Lieutenant General Nelson rubbed his white hair and looked at the tragic north-south boundary line of the planet on the giant holographic screen. The Federal Army's 3rd Defense Line had finally succeeded in resisting the violent attack of the Imperial Expeditionary Force. It seemed that the current ammunition base of the Imperial Expeditionary Force could no longer continue such a crazy offensive. The most important thing was that the land-based missile base in the Northern Hemisphere should also be in the stage of exhaustion. The situation on the planetary battlefield was developing in the Federation's favor. Until now, the Federation officers in the hall who had been silent for a long time finally breathed a sigh of relief. They switched the satellite image of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge to the main holographic screen. They had been silently watching the situation over there, but no one took the initiative to mention this point. Because the federal military could not transfer any forces to support the Iron 7th Division, leaving the Iron 7th Division to face the Imperial Moonwolf Group alone, the command center was worried but helpless. Naturally, it was inevitable that they would remain silent. However, who would have thought that the Iron 7th Division not only perfectly blocked the surprise attack of the Moonwolf Group on Luochio Spaceport, but even looked like they were about to eat the enemy? It seems that we still underestimated the role of the MX Mecha. Lieutenant General Nelson thought of the solemn instructions of Director Zhou Yingxing a month ago. Thinking of Commander Zhong's advice, his eyebrows twitched slightly. He knew that the command center's battle plan was indeed too conservative. Send a telegram to Teacher Xiaoqing. I will ask for a reward for them. Lieutenant General Nelson rubbed his slightly wet white hair again. Looking at the battlefield full of flames on the screen, he said with a smile, ask them to stay where they are. As long as they can hold off the last assault brigade of the Imperial Expeditionary Force for another 2 hours, the headquarters will be able to transfer a large number of troops from the dividing line. Victory will definitely belong to us. These were very appropriate words, and Nelson was very satisfied with them. However, a moment later, the senior staff officer standing in front of the command platform turned around and said awkwardly, the Iron 7th Division has activated a strong electronic suppression on all channels on the battlefield. The frequency interference is too strong. The satellite signal can't enter the division headquarters, so we can't contact them. Lieutenant General Nelson's expression darkened. What was the Iron 7th Division doing? Could it be that the troops in the mountains didn't need to be commanded at all? He immediately thought of a few hours ago that Lieutenant Colonel Su Lo, who was in charge of escorting Miss Jian Shuer away, also took the initiative to cut off all communication with the command center. Then he thought of this teacher Xiaoqing who had cut off all electronic communications. What a pair of lawless fellows. As the commander of the Federal Army, he was naturally annoyed by the appearance of two undisciplined people in the war zone. However, he had to admit that in tonight's battle, it was because of the stunning performance of these two people that the Federation was able to continue with that plan. At this time, the satellite image on the command center's widescreen was zoomed in. A black MX mecha of the Federation was moving across the mountainside, moving between more than 10 Imperial mecha. It was like a wave of wind, swaying in all directions. It was skillfully performing dangerous, yet exquisite evasive maneuvers. The officers in the command center stared blankly at the screen. Looking at the black mecha that zigzagged back and forth like a bullet, their hearts were filled with shock. This was also the first time they had seen the newest generation of the Federation's MX appear on the battlefield. Even though they were mentally prepared, they still didn't think that this new generation of mecha would be so powerful. What was even more powerful was that pilot's operation. In the countless split-second of time, the black mecha was able to perform so many complicated operations without a single mistake. It was like a tiger or a lion among the Imperial mecha, roaring and moving like thunder. Although the mecha's movements were not standard, they were exceptionally precise. There was a sense of sharpness in the smooth style, such a powerful level of control. How fast did one's hand speed have to be? Lieutenant General Nelson, like Du Xiaoqing, easily guessed the identity of that pilot. He thought to himself that the people personally selected by the war god were indeed more monstrous than the other 0.5 minutes ago. During the peak period, the effective commands per minute had reached 240, and the average command output value had stopped at a terrifying 150. If it was converted to universal data, Su Li's current hand speed had long exceeded 150. Perhaps some ace pilots who had undergone special training and were physically and mentally strong could reach this level, but they would never be able to reach 240 at the peak of their hand speed. This was because only the control stick and touchscreen were used to output commands. Even if there were 17 speed buttons on the control stick, this value had already exceeded the physiological limits of the human body. It was a value that could only exist in an illusion. Su Lo could because his mecha control method was a triple compound method. In addition to the common methods of normal mecha, there was also a simulation system tightly bound around his body. It accurately captured and magnified every movement of his body, converted it into a data stream, and entered it into the mecha's central control system. However, he was not as relaxed as the Federation officers of the Iron 7th Division and the headquarters thought. The half of his face that was exposed under the helmet was extremely pale, and his body that was suspended in the air began to tremble slightly. It was not because of the strange technique taught by the uncle, but because the accumulated creatine content in his muscle fibers had almost reached its peak and was affecting his body and nervous system. Outside the valley, He silently turned around and instantly killed the Empire's fourth-generation mecha according to Du Shaoqing's request. He looked silent, cold, and confident, but in reality, he had paid a huge price. In order to defeat and kill the Empire's ace pilot, Su Lu had pushed his mental strength and control to the limit in those 4 seconds. The peak continuously exceeded 240, and the consumption was huge. Commander Love, who was piloting the Empire's fourth-generation mecha, was one of the few ace pilots in the Expeditionary Army. If he had not thought of the terrifying maneuverability of the Federation MX under overclocking, he would not have been caught off guard by Su Li's thunderous attack. He would not have been able to last for only 4 seconds before exploding and dying. Su Li knew that he was very good at piloting the mecha, but he also knew that if he had been piloting the M52, he would have had to go through a tough battle before he could defeat the opponent. Even if Madman Li had fought him personally, it would have been difficult for him. Not to mention, there were still 9 Empire's third-generation mechas rushing over. After the 4th-generation mecha had exploded, the Black MX did not move. It looked unusually cold as it faced the 9 third-generation mechas. In reality, it was only Su Lu in the Black mecha who was tired and needed to rest. However, if the enemy did not move, he would not move. If the Black mecha did not move, the 9 Empire's mechas that were shocked like statues did not dare to move either. A Black MX versus 9 Empire's mechas. In the quiet night outside the valley, an absurd scene played out. After a while, Su Lu heard the sound of cannon fire from the valley in the distance. He knew that the Iron 7 Division had launched a fierce attack. However, he did not know that the Iron 7 Division was also equipped with more than 20 MXs, so he felt a little strange. At this time, he had already completed the mission given by the Iron 7 Division. Even if he took Jian Shuier and left the 9 Empire's mechas behind, there would be no problem. The Iron 7 Division would only thank him and would not ask for more. However, Su Lu looked at the 9 Black MXs in front of him through the near-vision screen. As he breathed rapidly, a thought burned like a flame that could not be suppressed. Go back to the valley? Beside him, Jian Shuier seemed to have guessed what he was thinking. A glimmer of hesitation and courage flashed through her big eyes. The girl clenched her fist tightly and said softly, "Give it a try," as expected of the descendant of the Lees of Philadelphia. In such a tragic battlefield, she did not show the slightest hint of fear. Instead, she seemed a little excited. "Okay, let's give it a try." Hearing the girl's suggestion, Su Lu quickly took a few deep breaths. His hands quickly swept across the control stick and the touchscreen. At the same time, his body that was suspended in the air suddenly froze. With a whoosh, the Black mecha rushed towards the 9 third-generation Empire's mechas. Like a cruel lion king, it was ready to pounce and bite the jackals that invaded its territory to death. The Black MX turned into a stream of light and knocked down 2 of the nearest third-generation Empire's mechas in the shortest amount of time. The cockpit of one of the Empire's mechas was directly cut open by the Black MX's sharp alloy knife at high speed. Sparks flew all over the sky. The other Empire's mecha was sent flying dozens of meters away by the Black MX. The mecha's engine armor was covered with spider web-like fragments. The mecha's engine died abruptly, splashing mud all over the sky. In fact, in the post-battle statistics, the pilot of this Imperial mecha, who had been knocked out by the Black MX, was the only survivor of the Moon Wolf mecha team. The Black MX moved, and so did the Empire's mecha. These 9 black and green mechas had long been shocked by Su Lu to the point that they had lost most of their will to fight. Thus, when they moved, they did not hesitate to turn and run madly towards the valley. Although the Empire's mecha pilots were brave and cold, this Black MX was already like a black demon in their eyes. It carried a tinge of fear and terror. This was especially so after the tragic defeat of 2 of their companions' mecha, which deepened their perception of the Empire's mecha. Thus, a very strange scene took place at the edge of the battlefield. The 7 black and green Empire's mecha began to turn and run madly. Behind them, Only a lone Federation's mecha was madly chasing after them previously. It had been more than 100 Empires mecha chasing after a single Federation mecha. Now, it was a single Federation mecha chasing after a group of Empires mecha. It looked like some kind of childhood game where you put your arm over your shoulder and said that it was your turn to chase after me. Then you would laugh and run away. However, how much blood and danger was hidden in the pursuit of these mecha? Just like this, the chase continued. The Black MX chased the Seven Empires mecha pathetically into the mountain path, into the valley, and past one of the battalions of the Iron 7th Division that had just arrived at the preset position but had not yet had the time to set up a concentrated artillery formation. All that was left were the shocked gazes of the Federation soldiers, as well as a particularly enchanting black shadow. Chapter 422. With the old geezer keeping an eye on everything happening in the southern hemisphere for him, Su knew even before the Federation HQ did. At the weak point of the Iron Curtain dividing line between the north and the south, the Imperial Assault Group with nearly 20,000 soldiers was moving at high speed towards them. Although he already knew that it was the Iron 7 Division who carried out the ambush mission in the valley, and although he and the Iron 7 Division had a complicated, insignificant, and vexing relationship, and this kind of relationship even sometimes had a kind of hostility between life and death, he still could not watch the Iron 7 Division be besieged by the Imperial Expeditionary Army. Because those young soldiers were his fellow countrymen, young men just like him. The powerful electronic interference that covered dozens of square kilometers made it impossible for him to contact the officers of the Iron 7th Division through the battlefield command system. But when he thought that the HQ should have notified Du Shaoqing, Su Lu relaxed a little. But he didn't know that the Iron 7th Division had more than 20 MXs in the valley, so he was very worried. These worries turned into a ball of fire. Following the hesitant but encouraging words of the young girl beside him, the invisible fire spewed out from the back of the Black MX and directly shot him back into the valley battlefield. With this chase, his Black MX chased all the way to the center of the battlefield. This was the area with the most terrifying firepower. Countless streaks of light flashed across the top of the mech's head. The smoke and sound of explosions enveloped the sky and earth. The bullets fired by the mountain howitzers were like violent men tearing apart the clothes of weak young girls, tearing apart the dark night sky with a sizzling sound. Of the 7 Imperial mechs that were chased back to the battlefield by the Black MX, one was destroyed on the way back, and the other 2 fled in fear. Only 4 were left. But Su didn't even have time to rest. The SCC monitoring system sent out an alarm. In the area where he was, 4 Imperial mechs were charging at him at high speed. For +4? How many mechs were there? This was not a problem in mathematics, but rather a problem in the heart. Su made use of the little bit of bravery that had been stirred up on the battlefield tonight to charge back into the battlefield in silence. The Imperial mecha, who had been fleeing in all directions under the powerful attacks of the MX fleet of Iron 7 Division, suddenly saw this Black MX with clearly different controls. It was as if the Imperial mecha had sunk into despair, as if they were a pack of wounded wolves that had been chased to the edge of a cliff by a pride of lions, only to suddenly see a lion suddenly appear in their midst. If he could bite this lion to death, even if he died, it would be more pleasant and meaningful. Every Imperial mecha pilot who saw this Black MX felt a fire ignite in their hearts. This sort of desperation before death and the strong psychological effect of suicidal thoughts caused the Empire's 3rd-generation mecha to suddenly unleash a powerful burst of power. Ignoring the serious damage they suffered, they forcibly broke away from the powerful attack range of the Iron 7th Division's MX mecha. They supported and covered each other as they moved to surround Su Li's Black MX. There were no communications or orders. At the same time, many Imperial mecha also made this crazy choice. At this time, the battlefield command system of Iron 7th Division had temporarily been disabled. The Federation pilots operating the Black MX mecha obviously did not understand the intentions of the Imperial pilots. They were slightly stunned and could only watch as the Imperial mecha in front of them retreated without any regard for their lives, rushing down the valley. The Iron 7th Division pilots were very surprised. How could the Imperial pilots be so heroic in their escape?
And where could they run to now?
They did not know that the Imperial mecha were not running away, but were trying to drag down the person at the bottom before they died. And this person was Sula. Don't blame the soldiers of the Imperial Moonwolf group for being so excited when they saw Su Li's Black MX as if they had taken an aphrodisiac. It was just that his mecha piloting skills were too easy to recognize. This Black MX did not have any long-range firepower. It only relied on its insanely powerful mecha piloting skills to sweep through the wilderness. It was so eye-catching in the smoke of the night, so enchanting. It was the culprit who killed Captain Love and led the Moonwolf group into danger. After 4 mecha piloting for more mecha piloting and 4 more mecha piloting, as far as the field of vision could see, all the Imperial mecha piloting the Black MX did not need any orders. They rushed madly towards the Black MX at the bottom of the valley. Knowing that they were going to die, these Imperial pilots only had one thought left, and that was to drag this Black MX into the galaxy of death. On the screen, the Imperial mecha piloting the Black MX, 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 mecha. Although there were not many of them, their momentum was extremely frightening. Su Li's face turned even paler. He did not have time to blame the Iron 7th Division's mecha battalion for their slow reaction speed. He already felt an unusually clear sense of danger. If he could reduce the pressure on the Iron 7th Division's mecha battalion, he believed that this mecha battle would end faster. Su Li rushed into the battlefield with this thought in mind, so he did not mind attracting the attention of 4 mecha, even if there were 8 third-generation Imperial mecha circling the valley at high speed. However, what was shocking was that he alone had attracted the attention of 16 Imperial mecha. Su Li and his Black MX were very strong, but he was definitely not stupid and naive enough to think that he was really fierce, violent, and invincible. Killing a 4th-generation Imperial mecha in one hit did not mean that he could ignore the siege of 16 third-generation Imperial mecha. Moreover, his piloting style was much more taxing on his body and mind compared to the average pilot. At this time, he was already extremely tired. The most important thing was that although the MX was a machine, it was also worn out. CLK 84 points. CLS 17 seconds of overload. The emotionless alarm of the central control system rang out in the dull cockpit. These 2 data clouds were the most important comprehensive calculation values of a mecha. They were used to evaluate the overall operating condition of a mecha. The latter would usually break through the peak earlier than the former. If both were to break through the peak at the same time, then many of the MX mecha's components could be affected. The most obvious point was that the onboard ADS adaptive suspension system would inevitably enter an active state of wear and tear. The former had already exceeded 84 points, while the latter had exceeded the peak by 17 seconds. As one of the designers of the MX mecha, Su Li naturally knew how unstable the mecha's condition was now. However, this could not be blamed on the mecha. It should be known that at Cat Peak, Little White Flower was still able to hold on for so long after entering the overclocking state. It was just that tonight's battle situation was too tragic. The moment the Black MX entered the overclocking state, it began to continuously receive Su Li's high-speed commands. All 3 systems were in overload. The MX was really suffering under his piloting. If he didn't do that, he wouldn't be able to kill Love in one hit and chase after the 9 mechas of Empire. He wouldn't be able to do such a weird dance while being surrounded by 16 mechas of Empire, with a whoosh, the alloy blade at the front end of the Black MX's right mechanical arm slashed down fiercely, creating a deep gash on the left shoulder of one of the Imperial mecha. At the same time, the thick mechanical leg's hydraulic system suddenly compressed, shattering the rocks on the ground. The heavy body of the mecha drifted to the right like a fallen leaf, dodging the 3 high-speed cannon fire from behind. The Black MX's speed did not decrease at all. Like a shadow, it swept past the 2 Imperial mecha in front of it. The huge body of the mecha completed an unimaginable twisting movement in midair, dodging the attacks of the two Imperial mecha that had been charging up for a long time. However, another round of cannon fire came from the side. The Black MX could not turn around and destroy the two Imperial mecha at all. Every second, an Imperial mecha would fearlessly pounce on the Black MX. Gorgeous cannon fire would explode. Danger was constantly singing a heart-stopping ballad beside the Black MX. In just a few short seconds, another two Imperial mecha were stripped of their combat power by the Black MX's strange and trembling steps. However, at the same time, another three surviving Imperial mecha rushed over. In the stuffy cockpit, only the sound of Su Li's heavy breathing could be heard. Beside him, the girl's cheeks were flushed red. Nervously pursing her lips, she seemed to have forgotten to breathe. The pale-faced youth's hands quickly swept across the control stick and touchscreen. His movements were so fast that they seemed to have turned into a series of afterimages. In this moment of life and death, no one knew what kind of peak his hand speed had reached. Moreover, most of the orders were still transmitted through the simulated reality system. Even he did not know how he had passed these 10 seconds of trepidation. In that split second of time, he had completely relied on his innate battle instincts and his intimate understanding of the mecha to subconsciously operate the mecha. In front of the frenzied Imperial mecha, Su Lo was still calm. However, his trembling body and hands had already gone crazy. The Black MX followed his precise orders and made one after another incredible, unimaginable evasive maneuvers. In the darkness of the valley, the Black MX was as swift as a ghost, as swift as a knife. If the pilots of the Imperial Moonwolf group were facing a situation where they were completely wiped out, or if it was because of the death of Captain Love, they had become obsessed with the Black MX as if they had taken an aphrodisiac of death. In the cockpit, Jian Shuer had already entered a state of absent-mindedness. Her thin military uniform and short skirt were soaked with sweat, and her slender and white thighs were smeared with light. The scent of a young girl on her body, to Su Lo, was similar to an aphrodisiac. Was this also related to the fact that he could continuously perform so many peak-level maneuvers? More than 10 seconds later, the valley battlefield gradually calmed down. Su Lo alone attracted almost 20 Imperial mecha. The pressure on the Iron 7th Division mecha was suddenly reduced. They ended the surrounding battles early and then silently and urgently rushed to the rescue at high speed. At this time, they had already appeared on the gentle slope. The gentle slopes that could be seen everywhere in the Yellow Mountain Ridge and the Lonely Mountain Ridge were actually trenches created by the flow of the planet once every 3,000 years. In this lonely trench, the last 12 surviving Imperial mecha stood alone. Right in the middle of them was the Black MX. The final desperate plan of the Imperial mecha to surround and kill the Black MX had finally come to nothing. The surviving pilots of the Moonwolf Brigade looked at the Black Federation mecha in the middle and truly fell into despair. The self-destruct system of the mecha was an internal destruction system. At this time, even if these 10 Imperial mecha surrounded the Black MX and collectively self-destructed, they would not be able to destroy the Black MX. Chapter 4:23. Attitude decided everything. This was just a very sportsmanlike slogan used in sports competitions. Although sports competitions were known as wars in the era of peace, compared to a real battlefield, it was just a game of house. On this blood-fire planet at the edge of the universe, where bullets were always more powerful than logic, the only thing that could truly decide everything was power. More specifically, in tonight's ambush or assault in the southwestern part of the planet, what could decide everything was the performance of the mecha. Imperial Expeditionary Force, Maple Forest Alliance, Special Moonwolf Group. This was a very long list of names. The length of the name often represented its importance. These words could help to confirm that these Imperial mecha pilots were very good at controlling their mecha, definitely better than the Iron 7 Division's mecha battalion. At the very least, it was impossible for them to be weaker than them. However, more than 100 third-generation mecha from the Imperial Federation were defeated miserably in the face of more than 20 new mecha from the Federation. There was no way they could fight back at all. The sounds of battle and explosions around them completely stopped in a very short amount of time. Iron 7 Division quickly cleared the outer battlefield. In the entire mountainous area, only a dozen tattered Imperial mecha remained. They were heavily surrounded by Federation mecha groups and heavy firepower units. The usually strong and heavy black-green mecha were now so weak and tired. There was no way for them to break out of the encirclement. The war between the Federation and the Empire was a war of life and death that had been condensed for decades. The lives of tens of millions of people were used as bargaining chips. The pressure was so cold and hard that the hearts of both sides were as cold and hard as iron. In the eyes of the people of the Federation, the people of the Empire were wild beasts. In the eyes of the people of the Empire, the people of the Federation were hypocritical and cruel mutants. A deep trench had long been drawn between the two races that could never be filled up. After several decades, the encounter between the two neighbors had long since turned into a bloody race war that fought for the small space of survival in the vast universe. Humans would not surrender like pigs. This was a very simple principle, so the people of the Empire would not surrender to the Federation either. The 10 or so third-generation Moonwolf mechas that were already at the end of their rope launched their final desperate and frenzied attacks amidst the ear-piercing sounds of grinding metal. This final attack was still aimed at Su Li's Black MX mech in the middle. Even further away, 20 or so Black MXs from the Federation charged forward at high speed from all sides of the gentle slope. This was a picture of a big ring within a small ring, but it didn't make people feel that it was ridiculous or funny. There was only the coldness and madness of death, and the desperation that was clearly transmitted to every speck of dust in the valley. Tragic was a phrase used to describe the final frenzy of the last mecha of the Empire. Loud metallic clangs rang out incessantly as explosions occurred one after another. More than 10 small green-gray mushroom clouds rose up from the gentle slope from time to time. Sula slowly took off his helmet and quietly looked at the last first-generation Empire mecha that had fallen to the ground not too far away. He looked at the explosion in the cockpit of that mecha, and his mood was a little strange. He could understand why the soldiers of the Empire didn't want to surrender, but he couldn't imagine what kind of ideology this group of soldiers, who had spent more than 7 years to come to a foreign country, relied on to shamelessly invade the Federation without batting an eyelid, crazily slaughter the people of the Federation, and finally kill themselves in the end. Could it be that the people of the Empire were really born to be so cold-blooded and heartless? Or could it be that the fanatical worship of the Emperor in the Imperial Society had turned countless people into lunatics? The last 10 or so Empire mecha had already lost their spirit. This last suicidal charge didn't cause too much damage to his Black MX. He used the fastest time to leave the battlefield. He didn't have the energy to help Iron 7 Division's mecha battalion anymore. He could only watch with his own eyes and think silently in his heart. In less than 3 minutes, Iron 7 Division had completely wiped out one of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's mecha battalions. The ultra-strong electronic interference finally stopped, and Du Shaoqing's usual calm voice came through the MX mecha's comm system. "You've worked hard." Sula was slightly taken aback, but didn't say anything. His palm lightly pushed on the control stick, and the Black mecha slowly turned around on the slope. He left the Iron 7 Division's mecha battalion that was cleaning up the battlefield and walked out of the valley silently and heavily. The 20 or so Black mechas of Iron 7 Division were cleaning up the last of the battlefield. They were trying to find a living Empire soldier in one of the cockpits that had severely imploded, but they found that their efforts were in vain. Right at this moment, they noticed that the Black MX of the Federation, which had played the most important role in tonight's battle, was leaving. The 20 or so Black mechas almost simultaneously stopped what they were doing. Accompanied by the muffled sound of motors and hydraulic pipes, they saluted the Black MX that was walking down the slope, and then silently watched it leave. Until now, most of the soldiers of Iron 7 Division still didn't know who was in the Black MX, but this didn't stop them from showing their respect to this mecha. There was still an entire regiment in the mountainous area. The heavy infantry and artillery soldiers all walked out of their positions and began preparing for the next battle, while smiling as they watched the Black MX leave. There were also many people who watched the Black MX leave, such as the officers in the Southern Hemisphere Federation Command Center, who were extremely far away, were all stunned speechless. On a mountain peak somewhere, Du Xiaoqing also took off his sunglasses. He watched the Black MX's heavy and even somewhat clumsy footsteps on the holographic screen in silence. The real-time battle report from the central mainframe was already out. Su Li's Black MX had one-shot one of the Empire's 4th-generation Moonwolf mecha, defeated 5 3rd-generation mecha, and caused 4 3rd-generation mecha to lose their ability to fight. This meant that he had single-handedly taken out 1/10 of the Moonwolf group's combat power. Du Xiaoqing's brows furrowed slightly. He abruptly thought of a certain young officer who should be on another planet right now. That young officer was also a lieutenant colonel like Su Li. In the past 5 years, Madman Li's battle record book had recorded the destruction of more than 100 Empire mecha. This kind of battle record was without a doubt the most insane number in history. However, today, in just 1 short hour, Su Li's mecha could spray out 6 stars. At this rate, perhaps it wasn't impossible to catch up to Madman Li. Of course, Li Feng had basically been carrying out special missions for the past 5 years, and his opponents were often the true masters of the Empire's Royal Special Mecha Battalion. This comparison wasn't fair. What really made Du Qing frown was not the shocking battle record of the Black MX controlled by Su Li earlier, but the final scene where the Black MX had led the last of the Empire's mecha in circles in the mountains. In the final moments, the Black MX hadn't been able to defeat any more mecha. Instead, it had seemed rather pathetic and dangerous. However, under the relentless pursuit of the Empire's mecha, what the Black MX had done seemed simple, but the fact that it had been able to survive was already shocking. Du Xiaoqing's eyes were extremely sharp. He knew very well that if Su Li had made the slightest mistake in his judgment, or if his operation had been just a fraction of a second slower, he would have been piled up like a pile of leaves by those crazed Empire mecha. Then, regardless of friend or foe, they would have gone all out to burn him. What are this person's nerves made of? To be able to remain as calm as a machine in this kind of situation, not making a single mistake, Du Xiaoqing mused silently. Unlike the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division who were watching the Black MX leave, although this iron-blooded division commander thanked Su Li for his hard work, he didn't feel any gratitude in his heart. From his perspective, Su Li was a soldier of the Federation. Tonight the army needed him. Since he had the ability, it was only natural that he should listen to orders. If it were him, Du Xiaoqing, he would have made the same choice as Su Li. Division Commander Du Xiaoqing was a standard Federation soldier. Although he loathed Su Li, he still abided by his duties as a soldier. He would never do anything shady on the battlefield. However, as he watched the Black MX gradually disappear into the night, a strange thought suddenly welled up in his mind. If one day, Su Li became an enemy of the Federation, if he was inside the mecha, how many people would I need to capture or kill him? A battalion or a regiment? Or the entire Iron 7th Division? At almost the same time, the invisible old thing on the surface of the planet and the Federation's command center told Su Li through different channels that the road to Luoqiu spaceport was very safe. The main forces on the north-south dividing line were conducting a high-speed maneuver deployment. He and his Black MX could take a break. Su Li was slightly startled. He took off the thin but heavy simulation system with great difficulty. Once his mind relaxed, even this small movement made him clearly feel the intense soreness in his muscle fiber bundles. This kind of soreness was an unbearable pain. He couldn't help but purse his lips tightly and let out a muffled groan. The accumulated sweat flowed down his naked body, like water overflowing from a pool. It flowed out from the simulation system and wet the entire lower half of the cockpit. It added a lot of unpleasant smells to the stuffy cockpit. Luckily, the MX mecha was waterproof both inside and outside. Su Li thought self-deprecatingly as he dragged the black box with difficulty and took out his clothes. He wiped his body carelessly and then hurriedly put them on. Just these few movements made him groan in pain several times in succession. An unhealthy blush appeared on his pale face. Su took a few deep breaths. He felt sore, tired, and hungry. These adjectives were about to knock him down. However, Luoqiu spaceport was still very far away from the pocket of his military uniform. Su took out a pack of 37 brand cigarettes that had long been crushed out of shape. With trembling fingers, he lit one up. He greedily inhaled deeply and then sprayed it into the sealed cockpit. Only then did he remember that the person he was supposed to protect, the nation's maiden, was still sitting beside him. Running for thousands of miles, mecha chasing and escaping, fighting in the valley, exploding to kill the enemy. Tonight's scenes had already caused Jian Shui's small face to turn pale. Especially the exquisite mecha piloting skills Su Lo had displayed. It made her eyes light up, and she was mesmerized. Although the maiden was brave, she was after all not a man made of iron. She was a professional soldier, who had been through a lot. Her body was already extremely weak. Right now, she was clutching at her chest, feeling nauseous. Suddenly, she saw the red on the lips of the young man beside her. She subconsciously reached out her hand and after a slight stiffening, she carefully took it off. Her slender fingers were trembling uncontrollably. Her action of holding the cigarette was unfamiliar. In order to hide her panic, she took a deep breath and then coughed violently. Chapter 424. Hearing the coughing beside him, Su Lo was slightly startled. He took the cigarette from her hand and asked, "You haven't smoked before?" Jian Shui's purple hair mixed with perspiration stuck to her pink cheeks. She nodded lightly. No matter how calm she appeared on the surface, after this night, there was still some lingering fear in her heart. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thought of testing the strange taste of the cigarette. "If you haven't smoked before, then don't smoke." Su Lo held the cigarette in his mouth and said vaguely. The half-burnt cigarette stuck to his cracked lips and trembled with his words, as if he was fishing. The cockpit of the mecha was oppressive and the communication system was silent. Su Lo could roughly imagine that the Iron 7th Division in the valley should have already started preparing for the upcoming Second Bloody Battle. However, he and this black MX were already exhausted to the extreme. He wanted to kill the enemy, but he couldn't turn around. He could only use his fingers to push the control stick and slowly drive the black MX on the military road to Luoqiu Airport.
Not bad.
At this moment, a white symbol flashed in the vision of Su Li's left eye. He had already taken off his special helmet, so these words naturally didn't appear on the holographic screen but in his mind. Of course, only that old bastard could create such a mysterious scene. This black MX mecha that had been carefully modified by Shang Qiu and the Nutshell engineering team had maximized Su Li's operating ability to the extreme. However, it wasn't designed with autopilot. Su Li stared at the symbol in his left eye and suddenly had a strong urge to squeeze the old bastard's strength. If the glory of the charter was a mountain of treasures, then today Su Li had been sitting on the edge of this glittering mountain and eating his meal. He had to eat as much as he could. Otherwise, before he ran out of treasures, who knew if the charter computer would go crazy and come crashing down on him? "I'm very tired. Help me drive this MX to Luoqiu Airport." Su Li chuckled, silently saying this in his heart. Then, he let go of his hands that were controlling the mecha and leaned back tiredly but comfortably into his special seat cushion. "Maybe you'll feel better after sleeping for a while. I'm already impressed that you didn't throw up." He carefully untied Jian Shui's tightly bound clothes, allowing the girl's body, which had been restrained for a long time, to welcome a temporary release. When the soft bulge under the military uniform returned to its original shape, it was a soul-stirring and graceful scene. The dark short skirt was no longer pulled up by the shy rope, and the two slender, smooth, and tight legs could finally be covered by the dazzling spring scenery. This process was even more seductive than the previous scene. If it had been in the past, Every inch of Jian Shui'er's youthful body would have made Su open his beady eyes wide to explore the beauty within. At this moment, however, he was already so tired that he could not speak. Seeing Jian Shui'er close her eyes tiredly, he naturally closed his own eyes as well. The glory of the charter, which freely traversed the atmosphere of the universe and planets, and the Federal Central Computer, which was at the core of the light, after hearing Su Li's request, did not express any more opinions. Neither the Federation nor the Empire had developed the technology to remotely control battleships or mecha. This was because the structures of battleships and mecha were abnormally complex, not as simple as the miniature surveillance aircraft commonly used by the Empire. The current computing power of the computers in the universe could not support remote control. Even the extremely powerful Federal Central Computer, the federal military had never attempted to allow it to complete this kind of remote autonomous control. Firstly, they did not have the authority to do so. Secondly, in their opinion, although the Federal Central Computer's computing power was amazing, it was ultimately just a cold machine. It could be imitated as much as it wanted, but it could never truly support the extremely complex operations. In addition to data calculation and environmental monitoring feedback, it also required intuitive judgment operations. However, at this moment in the dull cockpit, a young man and woman fell into a deep sleep. The heavily damaged black MX mecha, under the condition that no one was controlling it, gradually began to increase its speed. It smoothly and accurately crossed the mountains, the mountain roads, and the fields, heading towards the Luochio spaceport in the distance. At this moment, the black mecha was really like a black ghost. The low and powerful roar of the engines shattered the silence of the night. Countless heavy Imperial armored vehicles and the 14 third-generation Moon Wolf mechas mixed in with the Vanguard mercilessly crushed the fertile soil on the planet's surface. The engines that used hydrogen fuel did not have a bad smell, but the high-speed advance of such a large force still left behind an unpleasant smell of engine oil in the air. The last reorganized force of the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance, the Reserve Assault Brigade, had already arrived at the area very close to the front line of the Yellow Mountain Ridge. After a continuous night of large-scale air and ground joint transport and the mechanized rapid march after breaking into the Southern Hemisphere, the Empire soldiers in the fields as dense as the grassland felt a wave of fatigue. The establishment of a brigade in the Empire was larger than that of a division in the Federation. Not to mention, this assault brigade was the last trump card of the Maple Forest Alliance. Its soldiers were close to 20,000 people, and its armored firepower was also the strongest in the Alliance. The highest commander of this assault brigade was Major General Hughes. Under the puzzled eyes of the staff officers, the 40-year-old general ordered all the troops to slow down the speed of the advance. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the image he had just received. He fell into deep thought, and the wrinkles on his forehead piled up particularly heavy. 10 minutes ago, when he lost the coordinates and information of the Moonwolf group, Major General Hughes knew that something must have happened in front of him. However, military orders must be obeyed. In addition, after confirming that there was only one division in the Yellow Mountain Ridge area, he only asked the electronic troops to increase the anti-interference force and began to build a temporary position command system. He did not ask the troops to slow down the speed of the advance until the few remaining miniature aircraft of the Empire sent back a few still images. There were not many miniature surveillance aircraft scattered in the southern hemisphere like locusts, and these few surveillance aircraft had no way to get close to the Yellow Mountain Ridge area. They could only take a few pictures from an extremely long distance. The pictures were very tragic. Those familiar black and blue mecha tragically collapsed in the valleys on the ground, burning and deforming. Major General Hughes's face was like iron. He could not understand how a single division in the Federation could eat an entire mecha brigade led by Love. However, the pictures in front of him told him that this was the truth. What should he do now? Sitting in the command armored vehicle, he slowly closed his eyes. After a while, he suddenly opened them, and a trace of ferocity flashed through his eyes. his assault team was already stronger than the Federal Division to begin with. In addition, although the Federal Division had wiped out the entire Moon Wolf mecha clan, they must have paid an extremely heavy price. He had a very good chance of wiping out the entire Federal Division. Then, he would directly attack Luochio Spaceport, then take a detour to the north and threaten the Federation's vital military depot. From there, he would write the most important chapter of the North-South War on the planet's surface. He must continue to attack. Suddenly, Major General Hughes's expression froze, because in the Imperial New Moon command system in front of him, an old voice rang out. Retreat. The Imperial armies had strict hierarchy and discipline. Although Major General Hughes was disappointed and even angry, since this was the command center and it was old General Umbree's order, he had to accept it. In the shortest amount of time, he issued the order to retreat to the entire assault brigade. However, at this moment, Major General Hughes made a fatal mistake. He left behind the Mecha Brigade and the Heavy Mecha Brigade and tried to use mechanical cooperation and shoulder-launched electromagnetic beam bombs to deal with the Federation's most mobile Mecha Brigade. From a standard military plan, this arrangement was not wrong. The Imperial Brigade had to retreat without firing a single shot, so they had to retreat completely. In his opinion, as long as they could choke the Federal Army's fastest mecha squad to death, there was no way the Federal Army would be able to catch up to the fully mechanized Imperial Brigade that had not suffered any losses in the wilderness that stretched for 200 kilometers. At the exit of the valley, Shimin-Jin took off her earpiece and said to Du Shaoqing, "The enemy is preparing to retreat." When the Moonwolf group was wiped out in 3 minutes, the 3 mecha clans of the Iron 7th Division secretly withdrew from the mountain area. Under the cover of the night, they advanced towards the north and set up an ambush circle in the forest. However, before the two sides came into contact with each other, the Empire forces retreated first. This did not shock Du Shaoqing, because any possible changes in the battle situation were within his tactical calculations. In fact, he had long been prepared for the decisive retreat of the Imperial troops. Under his calm and clear command, the entire Iron 7th Division left the valley. It looked like they were preparing for an ambush, but in reality, they were already prepared for a high-speed pursuit. This outstanding Major General of the Federation slowly put on his sunglasses and said, "Inform the troops to keep chasing. Even if we chase to 30 degrees north latitude, we cannot lose them, until we chase these Empire forces off our land." The first to clash fiercely, the first to light up half of the night sky, was the Mecha Battalion of the Empire Forces, the Heavy Infantry Branch, and more than 20 of the Federation's new MX mechas. The Empire Forces originally wanted to use the mechas as a distraction, but the Heavy Infantry carried universal launchers and fired concentrated electromagnetic beam bombs to eliminate this group of Federation mecha that were clearly at the front. However, they found that they had made a fatal mistake. The unparalleled weapon used to deal with mechas on the battlefield, those concentrated electromagnetic beam bombs, could not hit the Federation mechas at all. After the electromagnetic beam bombs exploded, the blue arcs of high-voltage material gushed out, spreading out such a large effective attack radius, but it still could not lock onto the Federation mecha in an effective area. The mobility of these Black Federation mechas was too strong, and their speed was too fast. The Empire's Heavy Infantry Division fired these electromagnetic beam bombs 4 out of 5, but in the end, only 3 of the Black Federation mechas were destroyed. What was even more frightening was that while the Empire soldiers were still adhering to the inherent rules of teamwork, fighting and retreating at the same time, the Federation's Black Mecha had long abandoned all of those rules and regulations. Relying on their powerful firepower and performance, they launched a high-speed group charge. Like an extremely tightly clenched heavy metal fist, they smashed viciously into the Empire's final line of defense. Like a knife piercing through a piece of paper, the Black Federation mecha broke through this line of defense and chased after the Empire's armored brigade in the field not far away. Behind them, the Iron 7th Division's armored vehicles roared and roared, also increasing their speed. Chapter 4:25. On the huge screen, red arrows were rapidly expanding from south to north. These red arrows represented the Iron 7th Division. More than 10 kilometers ahead of the Iron 7th Division, the blue Imperial armies were trying to escape from the battlefield as quickly as possible. However, the mixed mechanized platoon they left behind to stop them had long become some kind of sacrifice for the Iron 7th Division's fierce offensive. Now, they could not complete their mission of retreating at all. The Imperial Assault Group should have been defending and waiting for reinforcements at this time, but the military intelligence they received from the Northern Hemisphere Command was very bad. The situation on the north-south dividing line had fundamentally changed. Two divisions of the Federation were rushing in from the northeast. If the enemy blocked the 20,000-man army south of the dividing line, what awaited them would be a crushing defeat. Therefore, this automated platoon could only try their best to retreat as quickly as possible. The Iron 7th Division attacked from three directions, crazily pouncing out from the Mayan plains and chasing after the enemy across the mountains and plains. When they were about to reach the rear of the Imperial Brigade, the three iron streams suddenly split into countless low-level combat platoons and stabbed toward the rear of the Imperial Brigade. On the screen, the crimson blocks that represented the Iron 7th Division suddenly split into many lines. They did not care about the coverage of the enemy's firepower at all and rushed forward fearlessly. There was no division or encirclement, and there was no roundabout way. There was only the most direct of straight lines. And when these straight lines that represented a battalion or even a company bit fiercely into the Imperial platoon, the ends of the lines suddenly opened up again and cleverly began to divide the firepower, and then bit down on the Imperial platoon in an orderly manner. Clouds of smoke floated in the wild night from time to time. In the dozens of square kilometers of combat area that was stretched into the shape of leaves, there were blinding lights and explosions at the same time. Specific orders were sent out from the electronic command system of the Iron 7th Division headquarters, passing through the pungent air and the dust of the explosions, and transmitted to every single combat platoon. Sometimes, orders were even directly issued to platoon-level combat units, calmly and skillfully commanding the federal forces like countless sharp knives, cutting the Imperial armies into bloody pieces. The commander of the Iron 7th Division was Du Shaoqing. This famous general of a generation who had never been on a real battlefield finally demonstrated his commanding ability and terrifying mental fortitude in the smoke of this planet. He was like the most brilliant conductor in the universe. Waving the stick in his hand softly, he had the complete control of an enormous and complicated ancient music orchestra in his hands. Even the tiniest change in tone or the smallest movement of the performers could not escape his eyes. But Du Shaoqing did not arrogantly try to personally command every single battle on the battlefield, because he knew very well that he was not a charter computer with superhuman computing power. He was only following the tactical calculations of the General Staff Department. At this time, the countless parameters given to him by the glory of the charter allowed him to judge the situation and adjust the general direction of every battle at any time, thus winning the final victory for his Iron 7th Division. The Imperial Assault Group was the trump card of the Expeditionary Army to begin with. Even though they were being chased by the ruthless and relentless attacks of the Iron 7th Division, they still did not panic. The soldiers of the Empire still fought bravely and valiantly, but when faced with the 20 or so black MX mechas that were like tigers in a flock of sheep, they found it extremely difficult to deal with. An hour later, in a certain valley that was still a considerable distance away from the north-south dividing line, the retreating Imperial Brigade could no longer endure the incessant attacks of the Federation mecha and the incessant attacks of the retreating Federation mecha. The entire army instantly spread out on their own initiative and began to fight in small squads. They increased their speed and avoided the attacks behind them as they sprinted towards the northern hemisphere at high speed. At this point in the battle, whether it was the retreating Imperial Brigade or the pursuing Iron 7th Division, it was very difficult for them to maintain their formation. Like countless balls, they began to run wildly across the plains. Sometimes, a Federation battalion would be sandwiched between two Empire battalions. Sometimes, a small Empire battalion would find themselves despairingly surrounded by more than 400 Federation tanks. The pursuit turned into a chaotic battle. At this moment, the accurate monitoring of the battlefield by the central computer of the Federation and the commanding ability of Du Shaoqing and the officers of the headquarters, who could not have been calmer and more meticulous, finally played their biggest role. In the darkness of the night, the Imperial Brigade that was like an axe had long been turned into countless fierce and wild pieces of metal. The Iron 7th Division that was like a machete had also been broken into pieces. However, they were like countless sharp knives. It seemed chaotic, but in reality, there was order amidst the chaos. Every company that was in the midst of the complex terrain clearly knew their position, their mission, and still maintained a fierce attacking posture in the Southern Hemisphere Federation Command Center. Commander Shaoqing, you really live up to your reputation. As a high-ranking military officer in the Westwoods, Lieutenant General Nelson did not have a good impression of Du Shaoqing and the Iron 7th Division. However, today, after personally witnessing Du Shaoqing's command and the valiant military quality of the Iron 7th Division, he still felt a sense of admiration. Although the Empire's assault brigade showed no signs of truly collapsing at this rate, by the time the Federation's 2 divisions that went to reinforce the Empire's assault brigade in the south, victory was already set in stone. Scenes like this on the battlefield were constantly happening in the narrow area at the northern end of the southern hemisphere of Planet 5460. The Empire's Maple Forest Alliance, which had forcefully launched a surprise attack in the south and successfully killed its way to the Federation's 3rd defense line, was like a high-speed cannonball that had shot through countless layers of alloy baffles. At the moment of exhaustion, the tide-like offensive was contained, and the Federal Army, which had been pressured to the point of suffocation, began to gain a rare moment of respite. Then, under the orders of the Federation Command Center and the guidance of the glory of the Charter, the Federal Army in the Southern Hemisphere began a counterattack. The cold Charter computer could not completely dominate the war on this planet. It only provided the most terrifying battlefield data and real-time comprehensive monitoring for the Federation Command Center to formulate a plan. At the same time, the powerful computing power of the Charter computer also began to carry out the most detailed tactical deduction for the counterattack. However, this magnificent counterattack did not achieve as great a result as the Iron 7th Division on the front line north of the Yellow Mountain Ridge. On the one hand, the Federation's main force was under the continuous and terrifying attacks of the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance. Their own morale and equipment had been greatly depleted, so it was difficult for a hasty counterattack to display their might. More importantly, before the Federal Army began their counterattack, those roaring, cold-blooded Imperial Expeditionary Force that had been continuously attacking suddenly seemed to have received some kind of order and instantly began to retreat. These Empire's troops attacked like a tidal wave and retreated like a tidal wave. When they attacked, they did not care about the fact that they had all died in battle. When they retreated, they were silent to the extreme. Only in the 300-square battle zones on the north-south dividing line were countless corpses from both sides, as well as tens of thousands of tons of dirt and charred chariots and mecha wreckages that filled the field of vision. Bori, you're really ruthless. But what exactly are you thinking? Lieutenant General Nelson's white eyebrows furrowed together. Looking at the receding Imperial Expeditionary Force on the light screen, his heart was abnormally heavy. No matter the cost, they had thrown away more than 40,000 corpses, moved out their family assets hidden in the glaciers, wasted so much ammunition, and finally reached the Federation's last line of defense. In the end, with one order from the command center, the bloodthirsty Empire's soldiers retreated without hesitation. They did not linger in the battle, nor did they lament as a senior commander. Lieutenant General Nelson knew very well that such a large group retreat on the front line proved the terrifying military quality and discipline of these Empire soldiers. Countless chariots rumbled across the planet's surface that was riddled with holes. The great battle of hundreds of thousands of people was played out in the darkness before dawn. The entire planet was playing out one magnificent and eye-catching scene after another. The 15 main divisions of the Federal Army set out to attack the Northern Hemisphere. This had already entered the third phase of the Ministry of Defense's plan. Under the guidance of the glory of the Charter, they chose the route to advance at high speed. Once they entered the Northern Hemisphere, they would lose this advantage. No one knew that the Federal Central Computer, which was busy guiding the planetary battle, was actually doing something else at this moment. That was driving for people, or in other words, turning on the engines. A wisp of white willow appeared at the edge of the sky. The faint light shone on Luocio Airport, illuminating the heavy firepower weapons with a charming metallic luster. A tremor came from the distant night forest. A severely damaged black mech walked into the base under the aim of countless heavy weapons. The officer of the airport, who had already received the information, drove a ladder car to the front of the tall mech. The hatch of the black mech slowly opened. Su Lo, whose face was pale, carried the still unconscious Jian Shui out of the mech under the shocked eyes of countless Federation soldiers. After waking up, Jian Shui was taken to the living area by a female officer to take a bath. Su Lo, however, asked an officer to take him to the cafeteria. Although he had already eaten 4 high-density energy bars in the mech, those things could not satisfy his extremely empty stomach. The second lieutenant in charge of leading the way looked at him with admiration and said, "Lieutenant Colonel Su Lo, the food will be here soon." Su Lo nodded and suddenly said, "Can you lend me your phone for a moment?" "It would be my pleasure," said the second lieutenant sincerely and happily. In addition to this excited second lieutenant, there were many officers of the airport watching from a distance with curiosity and excitement. In today's military, Su Lo was no longer just a name, but a celebrity. Not to mention, at this time, many officers already knew about this young lieutenant colonel's outstanding achievements in today's Federation attack and defense battle. Su Lo had just dialed a number when a large pile of plates was placed in front of his table. He stared at the plate of ugly, red food in front of him and was stunned. 5460 Rivers Special Crab, high in protein. "You should need it right now," said the second lieutenant nervously. Su Lo stared at the crab on the plate and shook his head. "I don't like to eat this. Please give me a bowl of noodles. Preferably a big bowl." Chapter 426. Jian Shuier took a shower very quickly. When the cook in the airport cafeteria brought the carefully cooked noodles to the table, she also came here and sat quietly and obediently across from Su Lo. From this point of view, she didn't look like a big star who was popular all over the universe. The girl who had just taken a shower was wearing a dark green military shirt. The collar was tight, but because it was too loose, it always made people want to explore the scenery under the shirt. The fluffy and playful short purple hair was now smooth like a purple satin, sticking to her cheeks. There were a few drops of water at the end of the hair that were crystal clear. She was like a beautiful lotus flower lying on the quiet surface of the water, painted with a layer of strange color by the strange light. Her whole body was oozing wet like the morning fog, moving people. Su Lo looked up and asked, "Do you want to eat some?" Jian Shuier tiredly shook her head and said, "I vomited so much that I can't eat anything. I don't know how you can still have such a good appetite." After saying this, she put her head on her arms and rested her head on the table, looking at Su Li's side face with a trace of curiosity and interest. The young girl's face was slightly pale at this moment, but it also carried an unhealthy redness that was caused by the heat and running around. However, her sharp chin rested on her arm, forcibly turning her delicate and tired face into a bit of pure beauty. The pink cheeks around her lips were squeezed until they were slightly puffed up like a cute little bun, making people want to take a bite out of them. Su Li's hand that was holding the chopsticks slightly froze. He suppressed the surprise in his heart and awkwardly stopped looking at her. He clumsily took the pepper bottle on the table and mechanically poured it into the bowl of noodles. He forced himself not to think that this national girl was staring at him. Relying on his instinct, he began to bravely attack the noodles in front of him. He ate a column of noodles with his chopsticks and drank half a bowl of soup with both hands. The spicy smell of pepper mixed with chili rushed into his nose, making him very comfortable. Su Lo ate until his forehead was full of sweat. He was so satisfied that he actually forgot a lot of things, such as the battlefield last night, the smoking corpses in the wilderness and mountains, and Jian Shuier, who was sitting next to him and staring at him seriously at this time. A bowl of noodles was finished. Another bowl of noodles was finished. No one came to disturb the officers of Luoqiao Airport. The empty hall was quiet. Only the two of them sat in a remote corner by the window. Only the sound of wind sweeping away the clouds sounded. The morning light outside the window gradually crossed the mountain forest and shone on the surface of the building. The slightly white light penetrated the floor glass and reflected on Su Li's sweaty face. Jian Shuier tilted her head and opened her big eyes to look seriously at this ordinary face in the morning light. She knew that this student of her father's would often have an incomparably natural and friendly smile on his face. However, in the cockpit of the mecha, at certain moments, when his smile would disappear and his face would become serious, there would always be some kind of wonderful light between those ordinary eyebrows. Last night, during the thousands of miles of escape, during the mecha battle in the valley, she had been sitting quietly and obediently beside Su Lo. She had been shaken to the point where it was incomparably painful. However, most of the time, she had been seriously looking at the screen in the mecha, watching Su Lo wearing a helmet, watching him do many, many things. The more she saw, the more she naturally knew, and the more curious she became. For a woman, curiosity was often a very fatal emotion. However, our nation's maiden had a calm enough heart under her cute and playful appearance. Thus, she was not like the daughter of the Nanxiang family, who might ruin a person's life the moment she saw him. Until now, she was still just curious. Who knew what this emotion would develop into in the future? Su Lo put down the third empty bowl and rubbed his abdomen in satisfaction. He used the sweaty sleeve of his shirt to randomly wipe his sweat and mouth. Jian Shuier suddenly opened her mouth and asked seriously, "Who did you learn from?" Su Lo was startled, but immediately understood what she was asking. In terms of mecha piloting, he had many teachers. For example, Bai Yulan, Zhou Yu, and even Li Feng, who he had sparred with before. He would never let go of any opportunity to learn and improve himself. Back then, he had relied on that strange mecha battle room in Lihua University and that thin and weak young master of the Tai family to learn the basics. However, in the end, he only had one teacher. It was that teacher who had taught him how to discover, get used to, and use the trembling heat in his body. "It was Uncle who taught me," said Su Lo very seriously. Jian Shuier's face showed a trace of peaceful sweetness and pride. She said, "So that father of mine is also very strong." Su Lo smiled. On the beach outside the Golden Star Hotel, the young girl in front of him had not asked more about Uncle. Now, it seemed that those curiosity and doubts about her birth father had been hidden in her heart all this time. Uncle is a very impressive person. He gazed at Jian Shuier and thought silently to himself that in this part of the universe, probably only that great military god could be a match for Uncle. Right at this moment, the phone beside his hand beeped. Earlier, when he had entered the cafeteria, he had made a call. However, this planet was too far away from the capital ring, so the call took too long. Furthermore, that second lieutenant's authority was too low, so the call was only officially connected after he had finished his noodles. However, it had to be said that the speed at which he ate his noodles was comparable to a hungry ghost about to be reincarnated. The time delay of in-universe instant communication could not be solved. After all, that involved a deeper level of research in quantum physics. Even Professor Shen was unable to touch upon this somewhat mysterious boundary. Su Lo held the phone and listened to a woman's voice from afar. A woman wearing glasses and greasy work attire appeared before his eyes, but it could not hide her youthful face and great heart. He smiled slightly and said sincerely, "Shang Qiu, I received your note. Thank you for adjusting that guy for me. It's very useful. Without this MX, it would have been very difficult for me to complete this mission. When I get back, I'll treat you to a meal. Right, I've introduced a Chung Feng Shi to you. He has some very interesting things in his hands. See if you need them. In terms of mecha, Shang Qiu, the first-level technical supervisor of the Nutshell Engineering Department, was unquestionably a genius. Although this genius girl was gradually getting older, other than her youthful appearance, her talent in mecha design had not fallen behind at all. Su Li's gratitude was very sincere because he had been very comfortable controlling the Black MX that night. He knew very well that Shang Qiu and those colleagues in the engineering department must have put in a lot of effort in order to modify this mecha. Especially since they did not have their own control data, the amount of calculation required was terrifyingly large. Leaving a note in a mecha. If this was made into a movie, it would definitely be a battlefield romance that would attract countless young girls, said Jian Shuer, looking at him with a smile. Su Li scratched his head. He really did not know how to explain it. There was indeed an indescribable sense of chemistry between him and Shang Qiu. Although the two of them had only been able to communicate remotely this past year, whether it was in the development of the MX in the past or in the creation of mecha tutorials later on, this pair of stunningly talented engineering man and woman had always been able to easily understand what the other wanted, thus forming a close collaboration. However, this was definitely not the love between a man and a woman. It was just a natural attraction between living things that shared the same magnetic field. Su Li thought so, but when he thought of the exaggeratedly soft breasts that had appeared in his mind earlier, he felt that he was lying to himself. He did have a good impression of Shang Qiu. Right now, he did not have to think about the black-rimmed spectacles wearing Zhang Xiaoming, but he would occasionally think of the spectacle-wearing Shang Qiu. Su Li gripped the edge of the table tightly, gazing somewhat uneasily at the morning light outside the window. Suddenly, he thought of the young lady of the Southern Prime Minister family who had courageously expressed her love for him in the Wood Valley Manor. He thought of the warm, peaceful, and comfortable feeling that beautiful girl had brought to him. Suddenly, Su Li came to a conclusion that made him panic. Could it be that he subconsciously liked all girls who were worth liking? Then what was this? Amorous or universal? Promiscuous or lustful? Had he been led astray by that hooligan Mr. Sher? The morning light was a little blinding. Su Li quickly turned his head and then saw Jian Shuer, who was looking at him curiously with her head resting on his arm. He saw that incomparably enchanting little face, that short purple hair that had always existed in his dreams. He could not help but feel confused and even panicked. He quickly stood up, prepared to get as far away from this national girl as possible. Jian Shuer opened her ink-black eyes and looked at him in confusion. She asked, "What's wrong?" Su Li's voice was slightly hoarse. "I'm going to rest for a while first, and then I'll fix my mecha. In the next few days, I'll definitely have to go out on missions." Jian Shuer was shocked. She pointed at the white salt stains on the back of his military uniform and asked hesitantly, "Aren't you going to take a shower first?" The afternoon sun shone warmly into the bedroom. Jian Shuer was nestled in bed, eating seriously with a bag of coarse grain biscuits in her hand while looking at the TV screen on the wall. She looked like she was at home, completely different from the scene of war that was going on everywhere on this planet at this time. The Federation's army was fighting a bloody battle, and Jian Shuer was not in the mood to live such a leisurely life. It was just that the Imperial Expeditionary Force's surprise attack plan had been foiled by the Federation, but the entire Luoqiu spaceport was still in the highest alert state. Under strict military control, although she and Su Lu enjoyed the best military treatment in the spaceport, it was still very inconvenient if they wanted to go out for a walk. Not to mention that the news on the TV was particularly important at this time. On the screen, at the large gathering site of the Charter Square in the capital's special district, President Pabre, dressed in a black suit, was reading an important announcement to thousands of ordinary citizens of the Federation under the sun. Dozens of years ago, the president of the Federation once said that this is a shameful day. Today, I want to announce to the entire Federation and even the entire universe that today is a day that is worth remembering for the rest of our lives. Speaking of this, the dark-skinned President Pabre paused for a moment, as if he was recalling the heavy history of the past. Gradually, a smile appeared on his face, and he looked particularly confident under the sun. Chapter 427. Under the sunlight, President Pabre looked at the camera calmly and said, "The codename of this military operation is Victory, because we will definitely achieve the final victory." The Charter Square was filled with jubilation, but there was also solemnity amidst the jubilation. For tens of thousands of years, the humans of the Federation had floated alone in the dark universe. In the colonial galaxies and the newly developed space zones, they did not find any relatives. Gradually, they lost their obsession to find extraterrestrial life. With a hint of sadness and a hint of pride, they confirmed that they were the only crystallization of wisdom in the universe, the leader of all things. However, in the last few years of the last constitutional era, people were shocked to discover that on the other side of the Night Scorpion Nebula, intelligent life that was extremely similar to them actually existed. Although the political systems of the two parties were different, from the perspective of biology and natural selection, the people of the Federation and the people of the Imperium walked on the path of carbon-based life with their heads held high. There was no essential difference at all. Some anthropologists even began to boldly suspect that before the unknown catastrophe, the human societies on the two sides of the universe were vaguely connected. The people of the Federation might not be orphans in the first place. Where did we come from? Was it the same place? They lacked evidence, only sunny and optimistic inferences. Unfortunately, such inferences did not have the time to develop into movies, novels, stage plays, or even the warmth of universal diplomacy before they were directly turned into smoke by the flames of war that year. As a result, what might have been a comedy of distant relatives holding hands and weeping together became a tragedy of flowers and silver trees blooming in the sky and blood flowing on the yellow soil once they met. From the day the flames of war began, the competition between the Federation and the Imperium was painted with a layer of thick, hellish ink by blood and death. No one ever explored the endless stories between the two civilizations that were so similar that it made one's hair stand on end. The negative emotions of anger, sorrow, pain, and darkness, as well as the impassioned words of revenge and resistance flooded into the lives and emotions of all the citizens of the Federation. At this point, the stars shone brightly. There was no other choice but to completely defeat the Imperium. In the words of George Carlin, one of the few people who talked about the Empire, it was that every citizen of the Federation had to be a natural anti-empire. In the last few days of the 68th year of the constitutional calendar, the Westwoods border, which had been peaceful on the surface for the past 10 years, started to fight again. The Federation, which had been waiting patiently for 10 years, started to move. Tens of billions of citizens of the Federation were excited, cheering and talking nonstop. After the gathering at Charter Square, the news channels of major TV stations began to mobilize all their resources to report on the biggest event of the decade. On the other hand, the Federation News Channel, which occupied the most authoritative position, had even canceled all of its routine news programs. Instead, it began to use text, pictures, and video to broadcast live the battle at the border of Ceylon continuously. The Federation mobilized 94 divisions in the early hours of this morning to launch the final general attack on the remaining invaders of the Empire on the 3 planets at the border of the Westwoods. With a solemn expression, the female news anchor with delicate features lowered her head slightly. She quickly flipped through the electronic text prompt screen and said at a very fast speed, "According to the latest battle report sent by the Department of Defense, we can now confirm that the main force of this victorious military operation came from the Westwoods military region. The one responsible for the interstellar military force transportation is the Federation's Second Fleet." At this time, a video provided by the federal military appeared on the news screen. In the vast and dark universe, a fleet of more than 40 Federation giant warships, which stretched for tens of thousands of kilometers, was heading toward a certain inconspicuous galaxy in the distance. The light of the stars on the right rear shone on the majestic fleet, making the hull of the space warship shine, making the scene look extremely magnificent. The female news anchor held a digital pen in her hand and asked in a sincere and respectful tone, "Professor Lee, President Pabre has declared war on the Empire. According to your calculations, How long will it take for the Federation to complete the first phase of the plan? Lee Jae-do, the Vice Dean of the First Military Academy, replied with a smile. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's supply of troops has not been interrupted, but as long as the two space channels are in our hands, the first phase of the attack should not be too big of a problem. As the only son of the military god Lee Pifu, Lee Jae-do had always been taciturn and low-key in the federal military and political circles. The people of the Federation did not know much about him. Originally, he was not willing to appear on the news program, but the Federation government had to ask him to appear in order to explain the war to the people for so long. After all, he was a member of the Lees of Philadelphia, so the people of the Federation would definitely trust him more than the spokesperson of the government. In fact, he knew very well that the image shown on the news was from 10 hours ago. At this time, almost all of the mechanized troops of the Westwood's military had probably arrived in the sky above the two planets and were in the midst of a forceful landing battle. In the studio, a white-haired war strategist frowned in confusion and asked Director Lee, as far as I know, the fleet of the Imperial Expeditionary Force has been cautiously wandering around the periphery of the region. That is the desolate region. The Federation has not been able to obtain an accurate star map. This time, the Second Fleet is cruising at full capacity at high speed. Once that fleet launches a surprise attack, the flames of war in the Westwoods region rose again. The military scientists in the Capital Ring were most vigilant and puzzled about why the Department of Defense dared to use the Second Fleet to carry out the full-capacity transportation plan. After all, the Imperial Expeditionary Force fleet that was like a ghost whose location could not be determined was really a big problem. The fleet of the Empire is currently in the 5460 system. Lee Jae-do was not used to sitting in front of the camera. He smiled and coughed twice before saying, "But I believe that they will never be able to return to the star system they are familiar with to be ghosts." The news immediately shocked all the staff in the studio and the countless viewers in front of the TV. Director Lee Jae-do suddenly remembered the mission that Mr. President had given him and said to the camera, "The goal of the first phase of the plan is to drive the people of the Empire away from the three resource star systems. According to the host's question, according to my judgment, it will take the Federal Army at most 1.5 years to complete this historical mission." The female host suddenly opened her eyes wide and asked an extremely unprofessional question that hit the nail on the head. The military operation is codenamed Victory. Does it have anything to do with the National Girls' Victory Concert? Resource Star System? Did they really want the public to believe that there were only mines and military bases there but no Federation citizens? Jian Shuier looked at Rong Pingjing's cousin on the TV and frowned slightly. A hint of mockery flashed in her eyes. Including 5460, in the three star systems that had fallen into the hands of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, there were close to 2 million Federation citizens who had been trapped under the iron hooves of the Empire for several decades. Meanwhile, the Federation government had always ignored them for the sake of the greater strategic arrangements, hiding the truth from the public. However, this was ultimately a decision that the government, parliament, and military had no choice but to make many years ago. This time's Federation government was at least correcting the mistakes that the Federation had made in the past. Doing some propaganda and embellishing was understandable. Jian Shuier lowered her head slightly as she thought to herself. A moment later, she raised her head and watched the replay of President Pobre's speech on the TV. A trace of a smile appeared on her face. A mature president or politician should announce the start of war before the midterm elections or the next term of office. On one hand, this would increase the chances of success and reduce the risk. On the other hand, it would also help them gain more electoral support. However, President Pobre had ignored the collective opposition of his staff when the new MX Mecha had just been equipped to the army. He had used his superb political skills to unify the opposing views in Parliament and forcefully pushed through the military deployment plan of the Ministry of Defense despite the objections of the masses. This kind of decision might seem a little radical, but hidden within this radical was a certain political philosophy that was worthy of respect. Under Mr. Pobre's tanned and simple face, It was precisely this respectable way of thinking that was completely different from most politicians that allowed him to win the recognition and respect of many Federation youths, such as Tai Ziyuan and Su Le. Just like many people, Jian Shuier also greatly admired this Mr. President who had come from a poor background. Because of her family background, she vaguely knew some of the inside story. This Westwoods war plan was completely proposed and single-handedly pushed forward by this charismatic Mr. President. For this matter, the president had even made a special trip to Philadelphia. The TV began to play the second video released by the Ministry of Defense. She carefully watched the federal fleet on the screen, as if they were transporting a flock of birds. They used the air-to-ground transport pods to deliver the heavy equipment and soldiers of the landing force to the two unfamiliar planets. Looking at the explosions that continued to erupt from the two planets, the hands hanging by her waist gradually tightened. The national girl Jian Shuier was the fuse of this war. It was hard to believe, but this was the truth. Furthermore, she was a top student from the 1st Military Academy's Warship Command Department. Her family background allowed her to hide an intelligent military sense under her cute appearance. Seeing this, she roughly understood the federal military's grand plan. She was the bait, and even the Federation's attack in the southern hemisphere of 5460 was just a disguise. From the very beginning, the federal military's plan was to transfer the last fleet of the Imperial Expeditionary Force to this star sector, and then begin to attack the other two planets with a thunderous force. Those two planets had been completely occupied and operated by the Imperial Expeditionary Force for many years. The situation was completely different from the situation on 5460. In order to tear open a hole in such an environment and establish an outpost for the Federation's counterattack, the Westwoods military region had to complete a sudden landing raid in the shortest time possible. And this first, they had to transfer the last fleet of the Empire away. A light flashed through Jian Shuier's ink-like eyes. Her delicate lips opened slightly, and she let out a sigh of admiration.
This was a simple military plan.
Although it had successfully deceived the people of the Empire and even many of the Federation's participating troops, no matter whether it was the reaction of the Maple Federation, the mobilization of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, or the advance arrival of the Federal Fleet, as long as there was an unexpected situation in one step, this plan could not be carried out. The person who made this plan had calculated all of the Empire's countermeasures without a single mistake. It was a simple and light placement of chess pieces, but it landed in every place where the enemy would definitely advance and retreat. What kind of realm was this? This was a terrifying realm where one had grasped every gust of wind on the battlefield in one's hand and grasped the reactions of people to the extreme. Thus, it appeared to be at their fingertips, at ease, and with great complexity as simple as it was simple. Jian Shuier thought in surprise. The old man had already retired. Why did he come out of retirement this time? Chapter 428. I'll get straight to the point. I haven't updated today. I'd like to report to everyone that the deposit for the house has been paid today. My supervisor and I both confirmed that the sales lady was really pretty. Then, countless things piled up on me, and I felt like I couldn't handle them all. Like I said the other day, the 1,000 words I forced myself to write just now were even worse than some paragraphs. Although the spies' plots had been on the right track recently, there had been some problems with their rhythm. This was because there was a problem with the rhythm of my life. Like today, it wasn't difficult to squeeze out plots to sell for money. I could always get some word count with a little bit of effort, but that's a fake product. I don't think that's right. So I can only not write. I can't write. It's not that I can't write. It's that I don't want to. Because you have to spend money for these words, and I have to be responsible for my own face. I've never asked for leave, and I've stopped updating twice in a week. It's very annoying, but compared to writing shit, the latter is more annoying. So, I sincerely ask for leave. I ask for leave because I can't help it, because I'm too busy to talk about it. I don't dare to promise that I won't ask for leave in the future. After serious self-reflection and calculation, I think that starting in March, the speed of the spy should return to how it was at the beginning. In the next 1.5 months, I'll do my best to write the spy well. In fact, in the outline, this should be the stage I'm most concerned about. I sincerely ask that after tomorrow, although you won't be reading the forbidden book in the snow outside the window, you can still read the spy slower than when it was 3,000 words. Because I want to write more carefully so that the amount of information and the things you feel will be richer. The spy has been laying the groundwork for the past few days. If it's 6,000 or 9,000 words a day, this kind of groundwork can actually be seen beautifully. But if it's all groundwork for 3,000 words a day, it will only appear dull and clumsy. So I want to spend more effort on the details. I hope that after your reading rhythm is ruined, you can be merciful. After thinking about it seriously again, I still need to adjust the time of the update to the afternoon so that I can adjust my work state. It's best if I can finish writing in advance every day, then send it out at the right time. That's more appropriate. Tomorrow, I'll write 2 chapters. From the day after tomorrow, I'll try to write 1 chapter every day at 4 p.m. Wind can't blow, rain can't hit. Because I actually like this story. Because the later parts of the story were all interesting and murderous things that I really wanted to write. Please give me and the spy more patience with the story. That invincible, great, and diligent tomcat, who didn't need to take a wedding break and only cared about renovations, would finally tear apart its fur and reveal its brilliance. It would appear in front of your fresh eyes every day in a slow-motion running posture. Although it will be written more slowly, it will definitely be written more straightforwardly, so that we and Sue can travel in a straight line through the universe with infinite glory. For the next 2 months, I definitely won't be soliciting monthly votes. I can just do whatever I want with recommendation votes. Anyway, the guests will definitely be good in the future, so I definitely have some confidence in this aspect. 1,000 words on the note should be able to prove that what I said was true. In my opinion, not updating while asking for leave is a sign of responsibility. I am still narcissistic. Bow and leave the stage. See you tomorrow. Chapter 429. Jian Shuier could be cute and innocent in front of her family, but she could also be youthful, adorable, charming, and witty to the point of being natural. She could make countless members of the opposite sex fall head over heels in love with her and be willing to live a life of poverty for her. This kind of natural ability probably had some kind of indescribable mystery to it. This was the real her, but it was not the entire her. The other part of her was unwilling to use the intelligence and ability she had developed at First Hospital and her home in Philadelphia to figure out the dangers and complexities of the human world. However, right now, she could not get rid of her doubts. They were like clouds that forever covered the night sky, blocking out the thousands of stars that scattered down from the universe. It made it difficult for her to keep her heart pure and clear even if she wanted to. At this moment, she needed to discuss the heavy and deep doubts in her heart with someone close and trustworthy, and on this planet, there was no doubt that there was only that small-eyed man. After going through a complicated authorization check, she was brought by the female officer to a large warehouse in the depths of the underground base of the spaceport. The national maiden looked at the scene in front of her and covered her slightly gaping mouth in shock. The underground warehouse was very large and spacious. A large black MX mecha of the Federation hung on a platform suspended in midair. The heavily damaged outer shell on the left side of the mecha had already been dismantled, revealing the dizzyingly complex mechanical structure inside. It looked like a human skeleton specimen from a medical school, except that it had a faint metallic glow. Also, because it was too large, it gave off a strong sense of oppression for the people in the warehouse. On the left side of the black MX, a simple automatic assembly line suspended 5 meters in the air was moving in many parts with a clatter. Below the assembly line, 6 officers were recording something with serious expressions on their faces. In their hands, the electronic repair records kept flashing rapidly, recording in detail every movement seen with the naked eye. The dark blue patch on their left shoulders indicated that they were Federation repair officers. One of the officers wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked at the guy on the black mecha, who was silently climbing and jumping like an ape. He said in shock, "I always thought that my repair skills were already not bad at all." Sulu stood on the tall mecha. After a night of battle and thousands of miles of travel, even the newest generation MX mecha of the Federation, under the frenzied pursuit of the Empire's Moon Wolf Mecha Brigade, had still ended up riddled with holes in certain areas, with some systems extremely fragile. Sulu believed that the Department of Defense would give him a new dangerous mission. Therefore, after 2 hours of light sleep, he went to the warehouse. He wanted to fix the black MX in the shortest amount of time possible. Pulling out a very long data cable, he narrowed his eyes as he stood below the black mech. His fingers lightly touched the control panel on the terminal to remove the outer armor of the MX mech. He didn't really care about the gazes of the 6 mech technicians behind him. In truth, those who had the authority to enter this warehouse naturally had the right to get close to the MX mech. Sulu climbed to the platform below the left shoulder of the mech. Reaching out, he pulled out 2 data cables, broke them with force, and connected them to the workbench. Accompanied by the sound of motors, the light silver automatic repair arm rose from the mech. Shangqiu had made many modifications to this black MX. In her opinion, all the long-range firepower systems that Sulu needed had been completely removed. However, she had forcefully kept the automatic repair arm installed on the mech. This was because she knew that for a genius mechanic like Sulu, a standardized automatic repair arm was more important than anything else. The light alloy mechanical repair arm was lifted off the roof of the warehouse by a crane. Sulu rubbed his hair, narrowed his eyes, and grunted. Both his hands grabbed the clasp of the repair arm and pressed a button. Bright electric sparks shot out from the top of the mechanical arm. The components that had been prepared beforehand were meticulously placed into the damaged interior of the mech. Then, one by one, they were quickly welded together. At this time, Sulu was wearing a dark green singlet. His muscles, which were usually hidden, were clearly defined because he had to operate the extraordinarily heavy mechanical arm. They were filled with a sense of power that had yet to be unleashed. He wore sunglasses and quickly and accurately carried out the repair work. At the same time, he requested parts from the 6 mechanics below him. Standard loop shock absorber. Number 3 ball joint transmission rod. You don't have it? M52 knee joint transmission rod. Please grind it down to a diameter of 3 centimeters. He stood tall on the mech, holding the mechanical repair arm, spitting out sparks. He was like the most courageous warrior of the Federation, holding a Darlin rotary machine gun, firing continuously. Every operation he made, every part he requested, would make the 6 Federation mechanics below him tremble violently in their hearts. This was because they had never seen anyone carry out this kind of mechanical repair. Every micro-operation that the young officer on the black mech did was so precise and appropriate. No one would have imagined that one person carrying a heavy repair arm could actually do so much repair work so quickly. Moreover, not a single action was superfluous. What made these mechanics even more fearful and worshipful was that in the beginning, they simply did not understand the intention of Su Li's repair actions. It was not until half a minute later that the embryonic form gradually came together that they more or less understood this kind of exquisite repair train of thought. They could not help but admit that Su Lo, who was repairing the Black MX, had long surpassed them in terms of mechanical repair skills. No, he had surpassed the skill level of most of the mechanics in the Federation military by too much. The legend of one person repairing a mech, which was usually unimaginable, seemed to be slowly becoming a reality at this moment. Therefore, that mechanic was so shocked that he could only repeat a certain sentence over and over again. The mechanics beside him also silently felt the same way. One of them stared with his eyes wide and pursed his lips. Looking at Su Le, who had taken out a small knife and was cutting open a certain sealed circuit, he said in shock, "Can this kind of parallel serial circuit be replaced by a triple overlapping circuit? There's no such thing in the textbooks." "We don't understand, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Don't forget, The MX was designed by him in the first place. The voices of the discussions were very soft, but Su Lo, who was climbing up and down the black mech, heard them clearly. He turned his head and said, "We don't have the materials now, so we can only make do like this. Do you have any solidifying gears here?" "Yes. I'll go look for them immediately," said the officer loudly. The mechanics in the underground warehouse had long been dumbfounded by Su Li's miraculous mechanical repair skills. They actually did not notice the arrival of Jian Shuer outside the door at all. If it had been any other time, these soldiers would have probably fainted from excitement upon seeing the nation's girl suddenly appear by their side. However, at this moment, they had long been completely focused on the mechanical repair skills displayed by Su Lo, completely forgetting about everything else. Jian Shuer had a military uniform draped over her shoulders. Her arms were crossed in front of her chest as she leaned against the door, watching the scene in front of her with great interest. She had already remembered that Su Lo was originally an extremely talented mechanic. Her earlier shock gradually faded, but at this moment, seeing the fanatical worship in the eyes of those mechanics, for some reason, a faint sense of pride actually grew in her heart. Yesterday, Su Lo had escaped for thousands of miles and returned to the mountain for a surprise attack. Su Lo had left an incomparably deep impression on this nation's girl, but it was very strange. At this moment, Su Lo was wearing a tight-fitting military singlet, sweating profusely and holding the repair arm like he was holding a large gun. This scene really did give birth to some indescribable emotions in her heart. "His figure is quite good." Jian Shuer looked at Su Lo, who was busy on the mech. Although not very muscular, the lines of his muscles were clearly defined, and subconsciously thought of this. Immediately, her cheeks reddened slightly, and she shrugged her shoulders in self-relief. The Black MX's damage was not too serious, but because Luoqiao Airport lacked most of the specialized parts, Su Lo could only use some common parts as replacements. This method of doing so would definitely cause the MX's combat power to decrease by a lot, but the fact that he could use those unimaginable ideas to make this Black MX stand up and run again was already very incredible. After a phase of the repair work was completed, the 6 mechanics officers left the warehouse. Su Lo wiped the sweat off his forehead, exhaled softly, and climbed down from the tall mech. He was very different from the average mechanic in the military. It was not because he understood this MX mech too well, but more because of the repair philosophy that Uncle Feng Yu had imparted to him back then. Whether it was a battleship or a mech, they were actually just tools used by humans and were no different from household appliances. Adhering to this philosophy, Su Lo did not have any fear when repairing the mech. He dared to fill in any kind of random replacement equipment, whether it was self-cleaning equipment or household appliances. In any case, he only wanted this mech to be able to move. It had to be said that it was precisely because of this difference in philosophy, the perception of treating gold as dung, that Su Lo could do whatever he wanted without fear. As a result, the mechanic beside him was dumbfounded and worshipped him from head to toe. After climbing down from the mech, his body and face were full of black engine oil. Behind his hips hung heavy tools like a teenager, clanking and clinking, looking quite pathetic. Just at this moment, he turned around and saw a head of purple hair. Jian Shuer looked at him with a smile. In the spacious warehouse, it seemed that some crisp sounds of metal clashing could be heard, like wind chimes. "You said that back then, Father liked to carry a lot of tools behind him. Was it like what you're doing now?" "More or less," Su Lo said with a smile. He subconsciously scratched his head. The black high-density mech on his hands was all over his face, smearing it black. Jian Shuer covered her mouth and giggled. After a moment, she regained her composure and asked seriously, "Does the Ministry of Defense have a new mission for you?" "Not yet." Su Lo opened the workbench and began to arrange the tools. In a low voice, he said, "But I think they definitely won't ask me to send you back to the capital ring again. No matter what mission the Ministry of Defense gives me, I still have to fix my MX first. After leaving this mech, there's actually not much I can do." Jian Shuer was silent for a moment. She understood what Su Lo meant. Whether it was the Special Mecha Battalion or the normal field forces, whether it was the Federation or the Empire, all pilots would have their own personal mecha. It was just like those warriors in ancient myths who rode their horses onto the battlefield. This is your mech. In a few days, you'll probably paint a lot of stars on it. She smiled and said, "Have you given it a name?" This was a tradition of the federal military. Every time a mecha warrior killed an Empire mecha, they would have the right to paint a golden star on the left leg of their mecha. From last night until now, Jian Shuier knew very well that Su Lu had the right to paint at least 6 golden stars. Su Lu thought seriously for a moment. Then he raised his head and smiled. The white teeth on his dirty face were distinct. "I'm going to call it Little Black Flower." He really doesn't know how to come up with names, Jian Shuier thought silently. Chapter 430. The Nutshell Engineering Department's first prototype MX Mecha was silver-white in color, so it was called Little White Flower. This MX was black, so it was called Little Black Flower. It sounded natural, but there was really nothing new about it. Jian Shuier found that Su Li's ability to come up with names was on a completely different level from the mecha repair ability he had displayed earlier and the mecha control ability he had displayed last night. However, looking at this face full of black motor oil, looking at that mouth of ridiculously white teeth, looking at that pair of eyes that were not big but appeared exceptionally clear and sincere, without a single trace of impurity, Jian Shuier narrowed her eyes. They were like the 2 crescent moons in the sky above the capital. She felt that at this moment he really did look like a little black flower. Using a classifier like flower, using a noun like flower to describe a man, especially such an ordinary-looking young man, made Jian Shuier feel slightly embarrassed when she woke up. Her eyes shifted slightly, and she changed the topic. Pointing at the enormous black mecha behind Su Lu, she asked, "This MX has been modified? Otherwise, how could it be so powerful?" She shrugged a little embarrassedly and continued, "I only know that cars can be modified." This sounded a little like the stage of finding topics to talk about before a date, but Su Lu was slightly taken aback, and then replied earnestly and honestly, "There were some minor modifications, but as for how it differs from the fitted MX, if I didn't learn this, I really can't say for sure." This was the truth. In order to match Su Li's control characteristics, Shang Qiu and the Nutshell Engineering Department had decisively abandoned most of the long-range fire control system of the Little Black Flower. It was difficult to avoid any loopholes in the mecha's assembly system. Other than characters like Su Lu and Madman Li, even the best ace pilots of the federal military would find it very difficult to get used to operating this Little Black Flower. Some serious problems might even arise if they tried to operate it. Hearing this honest statement, Jian Shuier's expression was somewhat unnatural. She shrugged cutely and pursed her pink lips self-deprecatingly. She grew up in the lees of Philadelphia and was doted on by thousands of people at the age of 12. Such a background and experience gave her a sense of pride in the Federation. However, this kind of pride had always been hidden deep in her bones, and she would never show it in front of ordinary people. However, although Su Lu wasn't familiar with her, they had been together for such a long time. Furthermore, he was her biological father, so he couldn't be considered an ordinary person. From her point of view, Su Lu was clearly using the enhanced maneuver platform. Why did he have to hide it from her? He even said that it was some kind of simulation system. Now that he could not explain it clearly, the proud national girl naturally did not want to continue asking, "Yes, I thought you were still resting. You must have worked hard last night." Su Lu felt the change in Jian Shuier's mood. He nervously wiped the oil on his hands onto his overalls and asked. Jian Shuier came back to her senses. She didn't understand why she felt a little uneasy because of Su Li's concealment. She rubbed her hair a little angrily, raised her small face and spread out her hands and said, "There are some things I want to ask you." The two walked along the deep underground corridor and walked out of the warehouse. At this time, There were countless warships and military aircraft taking off at a high density in Luochio Airport. Most of the Federation soldiers were busy in a state of war, so no one paid attention to them. In the space, only the clear footsteps of the two people and the crisp sound of the wind chimes behind their butts could be heard. I always thought that I had been in Channel 23 for too long, so everyone felt close to me. The script of the TV series was well written, and the character of the female captain was very cute. Other than that, I am just a very ordinary person. Other than being a little good-looking, there is nothing to be proud of. Jian Shuer was draped in a light blue Federal Fleet officer's uniform with a soft light gray thin jacket inside. Her hands were clasped in front of her body, and her picturesque eyebrows were slightly furrowed. The tenderness in front of the girl's chest was squeezed more clearly by her arms. Sulu turned his head and looked at her. He was silent, but in his heart, he thought that for a girl to be as beautiful and moving as you, that was already her greatest strength. I don't even know how to wear clothes.
You used to mock me.
Jian Shui stopped in her tracks. She crossed her arms and tilted her head to look at him seriously. I'm not even very competent as a celebrity. Sulu thought of the concert stage last night. The girl's tight red dress that made the soldiers fall into a frenzy, and that dark uniform that couldn't be any shorter. He thought of the smoothness in the mecha and still remained silent, but in the depths of his heart, he whistled to express his amazement. In any case, I think we should all be very clear that I'm not some big shot. Sulu suddenly turned his head. The dim lights in the underground corridor shone on her beautiful face, making him suddenly have some strange thoughts. His eyes gradually narrowed, and he asked slowly, "What are you trying to say?" "I don't understand." Jian Shuer's eyes flashed with a puzzled but determined light. Why did the Department of Defense use me as bait? Why did the Empire's people really come after me?
Can you understand?
I can't. You're here too? Sulu looked at her and asked. Jian Shuer lowered her gaze and said softly, "Don't forget, I'm also a soldier." Sulu fell into silence. Jian Shuer's puzzlement was actually also his puzzlement. Last night, he had been continuously killing until the early morning. During this rare time of leisure, this puzzlement had already made him feel extremely strange. He knew that he was just an insignificant part of the vast battlefield, and he didn't have the ability to guess the grand scheme of the Federation's government and military. However, the fact that Jian Shuer was Uncle's daughter, in the end, made him feel uneasy. He didn't know how the military god made the judgment, why the Empire's people launched such a fierce attack, as if they had taken an aphrodisiac. Could it be that His Majesty the Emperor of the Empire gave a random order, and then the expeditionary army in the north used this matter to vent their anger? It was hard to explain. Probably only Marshal Li knows about this matter. Sulu looked at Jian Shuer and said with a serious expression. Jian Shuer looked straight into his eyes and said, "If I ask the old man, do you think he will tell me?" Sulu shook his head. She was silent for a moment and then suddenly asked, could it be related to that father of mine? Her father, her teacher, was a first-class wanted criminal of the Federation, the traitorous mechanic Yu Feng. In this war between the Federation and the Empire, it couldn't be ruled out that this background played a strange role. Just from the puzzlement in her heart, she was able to grasp certain things clearly, like snow. It had to be said that the bloodline of the Lees of Philadelphia was indeed extraordinary. Hearing this judgment, Su Li's heart slightly tightened. After a moment of silence, he said, "I don't know, but I'll try my best to find out." The investigation of this matter was too difficult. According to his judgment, if it really was Jian Shuer's background that made the military god Li Pifa draw up such an inconceivable plan, then this secret might not be known by anyone other than the military god himself.
Thank you.
Jian Shuer expressed her sincere gratitude. "You're welcome. This is what I should do." Su Li's answer was very formal, but if one carefully listened to every word, it revealed the complicated yet simple, distant yet close relationship between him and the national girl in front of him, from Donglin to the West Woods. Did you see the news just now? I saw it. Those two planets are under the absolute control of the Imperial Expeditionary Force. The Federation's electronic surveillance network didn't leave behind a single bit. The Westwoods military is going to have a tough nut to crack this time. Those two planets are definitely more difficult than 5,460. Jian Shuer explained to him. It seems like Commander Zhong is personally commanding at the front line. Su Le suddenly thought of something and looked at Jian Shuer. He frowned and said, Madman Li, he must be there too. Jian Shuer's beautiful brows slightly furrowed as she replied softly originally. Su Le thought that he was about to embark on a journey full of blood and smoke, so he didn't have time to rest. He was in a hurry to repair Little Black Flower's mecha, even ignoring the fact that Luochio's spaceport was severely lacking in standard MX mecha parts. However, after an entire day, the Federation's command center didn't give Su Lu any new tasks. They just let him rest in the spaceport. The second day, there were still no orders. They just let him rest. The third day was the same. On this planet, the flames of war were everywhere. Every second, there were people dying. There were bombs blasting through rock formations, sending up clouds of dust. Luochio's spaceport was also absolutely busy. Even the 6 mecha operators with red eyes didn't have time to record his repair process. They were all transferred to the front line. However, he and Jian Shuer had nothing to do. They were just idling 24 hours a day waiting for death. This kind of feeling was a little strange. That night, after Su Le conducted the third assembly test on Little Black Flower, he dragged his tired body back to his room. During the day, he had already contacted Bai Yulan and found out that Group 7 had followed the mobile battalion back to the base camp that night. They would probably have to wait at least until the current phase of the war ended before they could reach Luochio spaceport by land. Unable to sleep in the middle of the night, Su Le laid on his bed with his hands behind his head. He watched the Federation's news on the television in a daze. The Federation Army's attack on Planet 5460 was going smoothly. The battle on the other two planets was as fierce as expected. With the Westwoods military district as the main force, plus the 13 divisions of the 1st and 2nd Military District, a total of 73 divisions were all deployed on the two planets. However, under the crazy firepower of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, the Federation had only managed to establish 7 bases on the surface. And they had paid a terrible price for it. The images broadcast through the news were all very heroic. It seems that the Westwoods Tigers have really encountered a tough nut to crack this time. Although Su Le had never met the fierce man from the Zhong family, because of his wife and little watermelon, and because the man had stood up for him, he had a very inexplicable sense of closeness to him. Naturally, he didn't want anything to happen to this commander. As for the crazy war machine Madman Li, he wasn't worried at all. Chapter 431. In the days of the war, there were brave Federation soldiers dying every second, and the 3 star systems at the edge of the Westwoods had long been engulfed in blood and fire. The relevant government departments were definitely not stupid enough to allow the major TV stations to continuously publish the names of the fallen soldiers in black. On the contrary, the news was filled with victory reports and commendations that were constantly appearing on the news. And the name that appeared the most in these battle reports and commendations was the Federation's 3rd Military Region's 7th Mechanic Division. The war suddenly broke out, and the Federation's propaganda machine launched a simultaneous and intensive attack. In just a few days, the Iron 7 Division, which had been gradually forgotten by the public of the Federation, appeared in front of the entire universe with an unstoppable momentum. It had to be admitted that the performance of the Iron 7 Division in this victorious battle was definitely worthy of the glory that they were enjoying at this moment. On Planet 5460, the Imperial Expeditionary Force brazenly invaded the south, and the Federation's 3 lines of defense were on the verge of collapse. It was the Iron 7 Division's blockade at the front line of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge that fired the first shot of the Federation's counterattack and set off a frenzied invasion of the North. This force completely annihilated the Imperial Moonwolf Group in the Mountain War Zone, and then immediately pursued the Imperial Assault Group, which had nearly 20,000 soldiers, for thousands of miles. However, what the Federal Military and Division Commander Du Xiaoqing did not expect was that the two Federation divisions that retreated from the south of the demarcation line did not arrive at the designated location at the designated time. However, the Imperial Assault Group had already regained their senses and launched a fierce counterattack on the Glacier Plateau, trying to nail the Iron 7 Division's pursuit to the Red Plateau soil. Du Xiaoqing, wearing sunglasses, silently raised his right hand and pointed to the north like an arrow. The arrow was already on the string, and it had to be released. The Iron 7th Division was exhausted, but they were still silent and valiant. They charged toward the Imperial Assault Group, who were trying to regroup and organize a counterattack. The valiant soldiers of the Federation and the soldiers of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, whose willpower was tempered by ice and snow, once again clashed with each other on the Red Plateau. The formation that had just been formed was once again disrupted. The Iron 7th Division still coldly continued their crazy and fierce pursuit. This desperate chase lasted from late night to early morning, and from early morning to dusk. It was unknown how much blood was sprayed into the sky, making the sunset incomparably bewitching red that night. When the red clouds were as red as blood, the Iron 7 Masters obtained the final victory. However, they also paid an extremely disastrous price. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's strategy of defending and waiting for reinforcements, which had been maintained for decades, suddenly melted like ice and snow, just like the once every 3,000 years flow of this planet. The Maple Forest Alliance's many years of savings were all used up because of His Majesty's reckless order, and because of old General Ambry's ruthless and even somewhat desperate decision to leave his homeland. All of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's heavy weapons, secret land-based missile bases, electronically controlled micro-aircraft hangars, military deployments, and even the most real strength of the troops were all exposed in front of the Federal Army. With the Iron 7th Division's tragic victory as the starting point, the Federation began a rapid counterattack from the south to the north. Whether it was the command center, the Westwoods Military District, or the Department of National Defense far away in the Capital Ring, none of them would let go of such a heaven-sent opportunity to plan for the results of this battle. The Federation had a total of nearly 3,452 mechas, and more than 300 of them were thrown on the north-south border of this planet. Like countless cold iron protrusions, they mixed in with the automated mechanical troops and advanced towards the north. There were also dozens of strange black MX mechas appearing and disappearing in the mountains and wilderness. The Maple Forest Alliance retreated decisively like a tide, and the Federal Army chased after them fiercely like a forest fire, until the planet turned into a sea of fire. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's Maple Forest Alliance was made up of 9 army brigades and 1 mecha brigade. Including the logistics and related officers in the base, they had a total of more than 218,000 people. When they retreated to the safe zone of mid-range missiles in the northern hemisphere that was covered in ice and snow, they had already left behind more than 60,000 corpses on the ground in the south. The Maple Forest Alliance took 17 mecha clans from the army brigades and took on the task of attacking on the front line. In the end, only 5 of them were able to retreat with their formation intact. What was more fatal was that under the attack of the Federation's air power and concentrated long-range missiles, it was very difficult for the Imperial armies to move their heavy firepower equipment into the warehouses hidden by the glaciers. The protracted battle was cut in half at the waist, and it was very difficult for them to continue. The plan of the Federation's Ministry of Defense was 1/3 complete, and the Imperial Expeditionary Force was holed up in the ice and snow of the Northern Hemisphere, without any signs of life. At this point, the general situation of Planet 5460 was set. The military commander of the Empire, old General Ambly was not inferior to his counterparts in the Federation. In fact, he did not make a mistake. Although he did not think that this was a trap set by the Federation in the beginning, he was prepared to break the trap. However, he did not expect that the Federation would silently send another black noose into this big trap. As the saying goes, a big ring encircles a small ring. The old general of the Empire lost because of the source, because of His Majesty the Emperor's random order. Old General Ambly's old face was as cold as the ice and snow around him. His sparse eyebrows were mixed with ice shards as he stood on the top floor of the base covered in ice and snow. His old hands continuously patted the steel railings, and his heart was filled with endless emotions and shock. How could the Federation have guessed His Majesty the Emperor's random order? Or could it be that the Federation's spies had unbelievably infiltrated the core of the Empire? Unlike the fireworks of the victory of Planet 5460, the remaining two-thirds of the Ministry of Defense's plan did not go so smoothly. The main fleet of the Federation had to be stationed at the Gary Corridor and the Night Scorpion Nebula. Even if they had to wait for 100,000 years, they had to be on guard against the appearance of the Imperial fleet. That was the scenario that the Federation feared the most. The Ministry of Defense's plan was to use Jian Shuier as bait to ignite a local war, then use the local war to trigger a planetary war. Using this planetary war, they would then use this planetary war to lure the only fleet of the Imperial Expeditionary Force to leave the barren star field. Once the Imperial fleet was lured away, the Ministry of Defense would then secretly prepare for a large-scale landing on the other two fallen planets. They would be able to obtain the precious and safe outer space environment. There was nothing wrong with this plan, except that the Federation did not expect that old General Ambly would directly use the Federation's plan to start a tragic planetary war. Except that they did not expect that the Imperial Expeditionary Force would actually spend decades to set up such dense and violent stratospheric firepower on the two fallen planets. On these two planets at the border of the Sylvan region, although the Federation's offensive could not be said to be gloomy, it had sunk into a kind of chilling stalemate. Every moment, there were countless Sylvan native soldiers whose names were marked with black boxes, signifying their death on the news. The Senate had just passed an order of commendation for the Iron 7th Division. At the same time, the commanders of the two divisions that delayed the military flight were immediately removed from their posts and sent back to the Capital Ring military court for trial. Sulu narrowed his eyes, then turned off the TV, and began to think about some problems with his eyes closed. The two divisions were directly under the command of the Westwoods Military Command. The Iron 7th Division was constantly on the news and receiving commendations. Sulu did not find it strange. Although the troops led by Du Shaoqing were the first to go to the front lines, they had displayed a fierce iron will and outstanding military service, so it was natural for them to receive commendations. The problem was that the two fallen planets of the Westwoods Military Command that were the main offensive force were unable to break through the situation. Thinking of the rumors that Zhong Laohu of the Westwoods had been suppressing Du Shaoqing and the Iron 7th Division, and the two Westwoods commanders who were arrested, Sulu felt a little strange, and thought about it. Although the son of the Zhong family in the Westwoods was really stupid, and those powerful relatives of the Zhong family were really annoying, Sulu still sat on the side of the Westwoods Zhong family, because that was the home of Little Watermelon and Mrs. Zhong. Sulu fell into a deep sleep as he thought about this without a clue. Outside the spaceport, from time to time, the roar of battleships taking off and landing, the noisy sound of engines exploding, and the orderly and solemn footsteps of soldiers could not wake him up, because this was a beautiful dream. However, when he turned around, he saw a young girl in a white dress standing by the window. The light from the sun shone in through the window, illuminating the young girl's youthful body and revealing her curves. What moved his heart the most was the pair of slender, tight, and smooth legs that did not match her height. They were somewhat exaggerated. The girl did not answer, but in the dream, Sulu knew who she was because she had short purple hair. Sulu felt that he was blaspheming an artist's oil painting. He reluctantly turned his head back, but he saw that the Shangqiu under him had become the beautiful daughter of the Nan family. Nan Xiangmei, who was being pressed down by his strong body, was wearing a dark blue turtleneck imitation sweater. Her eyes were closed tightly, and her black eyelashes were slightly trembling. She seemed to be awake, but refused to open her eyes, as if she was expecting something. Her cheeks were full of shyness, and there was a touch of purity in her gentleness. However, in front of this purity, he was a little violent and excited. He grabbed the hem of the dark blue sweater and pulled it up, exposing Nan Xiangmei's white jade-like upper body to the air. Sulu only felt that it was warm and soft, and the fine particles on her creamy skin were shivering. It seemed that the air was a little cold. A little cold? It was indeed a little cold in the gatehouse, and the pear garden outside the window was still snowing. He looked up in excitement and confusion and saw the pair of black-rimmed glasses. However, the pair of eyes under the glasses did not have any sense of righteousness, only incomparably seductive and pure. The girl was also wearing a pair of red devil horns on her head, like a clumsy elf imitating a little goblin. Sulu, who was sweating all over, suddenly woke up. He sat on the bed in a daze for a long time and looked at his hands in a daze. Then he walked into the bathroom dejectedly, turned on the tap, and began to wash his clothes. Chapter 432. Drying his wet underwear on the heater rack, he turned on the switch and let the cold water droplets fall from the sky. Sulu rubbed his skin hard until his back was red. He took a longer shower than usual. In the cold water, he raised his hands in front of his eyes in a daze. Looking at the white skin on his fingertips, he thought to himself that his hands should be used to operate a mecha. Although a mecha could indeed shoot down a plane, he didn't understand why he had this wet dream. Thinking about the romantic fantasy that flashed through his mind a few days ago, he couldn't help but be shocked at how much his moral standards had dropped while the level of testosterone in his body had increased too much. However, he completely didn't realize that in reality, the war and death on this planet itself was a supreme weapon that stimulated lust and shattered all spiritual rules. Holding the cold porcelain basin with both hands, he looked at the somewhat unfamiliar young face in the mirror. There was no steam in the bathroom, so there was no fog on the mirror. He didn't need to use his hands to wipe it away, but why did that face look so unfamiliar? The straight eyebrows were still resting peacefully above his eyes, like two unsheathed flying knives. The fine hair between his eyebrows hadn't been shaved for a long time. The two thick black lines seemed to connect together, but there was no sense of valiance. Matched with the pair of small eyes below, it made people feel that this face was very trustworthy. But it was still unfamiliar because that pair of eyes seemed too calm. Sulu looked at himself in the mirror and thought about a few years ago. After he scared off that person on Donglin's Clock Tower Street, he had also been silent and nervous in the bathroom mirror. That person was called Bao Longtao, right? How come he was almost forgetting his name? Sulu found that after he escaped from Donglin, he had become more and more silent and calm. However, this silence and calm, to him, was somewhat similar to an undesirable aura. He didn't think this was his nature, and he didn't like this kind of outward change, so he stared at himself in the mirror in a daze. He didn't understand what the Federation's plan was. Jian Shuer said that the Westwood's military's main attack on the two fallen stars was very difficult, and that the days of the Zhong family's tiger were very difficult, but he didn't understand. He didn't understand the Empire's ferocious attacks and their resolute retreat, nor did he understand the Federation's meticulous and wondrous military arrangements, nor did he understand the art of war command. At the end of the day, he was just an insignificant character in the Grand Galactic War. He could only silently turn back to repair his mecha and then travel through the forest at high speed. This was his greatest reliance. However, he had already begun to kill his enemies. Those Imperial mecha that had exploded in front of him and behind him, those corpses that had died with their eyes wide open, their twisted bodies constantly stimulating his brain. When he was in Eastwood, he had no knowledge of the people of the Empire. It was only when he saw the black tombstones on the graveyard in Macklin that he had a direct understanding of the people of the Empire. Sulu had killed a lot of people. When he was a child, blood dripped from the tip of the hydraulic pipe in the garbage dump, a gun barrel in the underground parking lot of Lynn High, and corpses were everywhere in the Foundation building. He was a good person, and good people could kill without blinking, let alone someone from the Empire. However, it was too easy for people to die on the battlefield. Life was too cheap here. In the middle of the night, Sulu, who was hit hard by the atmosphere of war, felt a little lost in his youthful state. He walked out of his room and listened to the chaotic and nervous noises outside the spaceport. He silently lowered his head and walked towards the end of the quiet corridor. Little Black Flower's Mecca was quietly waiting on the other end. In the cold, dangerous, and complicated web of war, no matter how strong an individual's strength was, they were just an insect that was stuck in the web. They could be swallowed up at any moment. There was no chance of survival. He had to repair his personal MX. That way, he would have an extra set of armor and a few more sharp knives. When he struggled in the web in the future, he would be able to make a bigger commotion. There was a military satellite phone in the quiet corridor. Sulu silently thought for a moment. He turned his head, picked up the phone terminal scanner, and placed it behind his neck to scan it. After passing the authorization, he pressed a string of numbers. It was Shi Qinghai's phone call. The call was picked up very quickly. From this detail, Sulu knew that he had already arrived in the West Woods. His mood couldn't help but become heavier. "How's your job as a liaison officer?" Sulu leaned against the cold wall and smiled at his friend on the other end of the phone. "The overall situation here is not a problem, but there are still some dangers. But the Department of Defense hasn't sent any orders, so I'm just waiting for death in the spaceport." Shi Qinghai's bright and charming laughter came from the other end of the phone. Sulu smiled and began to talk about his feelings when he was on a battlefield for the first time. His tone was slightly heavy and worried. The war between the Federation and the Imperium was like a fight between two rock giants. Every heavy punch might not hurt the other party, but the falling pieces of rocks would definitely kill the other party. After a short pause, Sulu thought of the dream he had. His cheeks were slightly hot as he talked about it. Then he nervously asked in a hoarse voice, "Should I be in a relationship? But how can I like 4 people at the same time?" Shi Qinghai on the other end of the phone suddenly asked, "Have you been stimulated by a woman recently?" Sulu shook his head. Strangely, Shi Qinghai on the other side of the planet seemed to have seen his movement. He said in a slightly mocking tone, "Although I'm busy now, I still watch the news. The scandal between you and that national girl is so big. Although you're wearing a pair of Toad sunglasses, do you think you can hide it from my lightning-like eyes?"
Sulu was silent.
Shi Qinghai on the other end of the phone was silent for a while. Then he said seriously, "I think you should find a woman." Sulu replied, "Don't they mean the same thing? Falling in love doesn't mean that you can sleep with her, but you might have to get married. You definitely won't get married, but you definitely have to sleep with her." Shi Qinghai said sarcastically, "These are 2 very different things." "You mean venting?" Sulu held the phone and lowered his voice. "Is this really that interesting? If it's not interesting, then why are you dreaming?" "I'm just asking. Why are you so angry?" Sulu was a little annoyed. He looked at the remaining time on the phone and suddenly said seriously, "You have to take care of yourself." The anti-government forces in Green Dragon Mountain were officially part of the government forces. They came to the front line of the West Woods to fight. Presumably, these soldiers would join the battlefield after some time. Sulu was very clear that there would be a lot of dangerous and complicated compromises and exploitation. Shi Qinghai's role as a liaison officer was very dangerous. Shi Qinghai on the other end of the phone was silent for a while. Then he said, "You also take care of yourself. Overly high-profile morality can only cultivate hypocrites. In my opinion, although our young leader has never put the word morality on his lips, he has always put it above his head, and he can't wait for everyone to see. Is this a big lie that looks real, Or is it real gold and silver? The flames of war had spread to the glacier forest in the northern hemisphere. The long-range firepower of the Imperial Expeditionary Force was suppressed to the brink of collapse. This road that passed by the front line of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge returned to silence. At this moment, a motorcade composed of dozens of military and civilian vehicles slowly drove over. The roaring sound of the engines broke the silence. In the back of a military vehicle, these extremely sarcastic words were even more harsh than the sound of the engines. Bai Yulan lowered her head and dozed off. She couldn't stop Lan Xiaolong from nagging. Her delicate eyebrows couldn't help but furrow. Lan Xiaolong was smoking a cigarette. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the blackened sparks on the mountain outside the window. He looked at the scattered metal wreckage and secretly assessed the extent of the battle that happened that night. His lips moved, but he didn't stop his sarcastic remarks. That old man is good. He took the nation's girl and ran away. He saved that camp. Isn't it cool? Isn't it glorious? But what about us? We didn't fire a single shot when we went to the front line. Although we didn't become deserters, we became leftovers and were thrown back to the headquarters by him. The cigarette on Lan Xiaolong's lips swayed up and down. He looked very interesting. The sarcastic expression on his face was full of sarcasm. The 7th Combat Team didn't fight a single battle. They're about to be transferred back to the Westwoods. Speaking of which, all the battles were fought by our supervisor alone. Of course, we can only follow behind him and watch the show. What are we doing here? Traveling? In the carriage, Xiong Linquan had been carefully maintaining the heavy rotary machine gun. When he heard Lan Xiaolong's words, his face became a little ugly. The rest of the soldiers of the 7th Combat Team felt the same. Of course, they didn't have any opinions about Supervisor Su Le. They just thought that since the war had started, they, who were originally very fierce, couldn't do anything because they had an even fiercer supervisor. It was really a little frustrating. You're not originally a member of the 7th Combat Team. Bai Yulan finally spoke softly. I don't understand why the division sent you here. Lan Xiaolong threw the cigarette out of the window. The cigarette landed on the charred platform of the grenade launcher, creating a small spark. He said, of course, it's to protect the Federation's treasure. Our Lieutenant Colonel Su Le. Bai Yulan frowned. Damn it, how could they send a major to protect a lieutenant colonel? Furthermore, this guy's military skills were quite average. However, he had been in the port city's 83-84 unit for many years, so his military style was quite obvious. Lan Xiaolong ignored him and said to the men of the 7th Combat Team who had their heads lowered, our supervisor is on a mecha. Of course, we can't follow, but you have to think about it. He's already a lieutenant colonel. He can't be using a MX to pretend to be a soldier and kill everywhere. In the West Woods, in the Empire, in the mountains, in the grasslands, constantly killing in and out, playing the hero 7 times in and out, and finally dying of exhaustion and walking to the end of the road? Bullshit. He has to be the commanding officer of the unit, like a regiment commander or division commander. However, we all know that although that guy has been studying commanding teaching materials every day for the past few months, when it comes to commanding, he doesn't have much of a future. He's a few thousand streets behind someone like Du Shaoqing. When the time comes, what do you think we can do for him? Gu Shifeng, Lu Jiao, Xiong Linquan, you all need to think about it carefully. Lan Xiaolong was like a hooligan as he gestured around. Bai Yulan, who had her head lowered and remained silent, suddenly felt a chill in her heart. She thought about how the Department of Defense had directly transferred this guy from the 17th Armored Division to her team. She thought about how her 7th Combat Team couldn't get rid of the background of the 17th Armored Division. Bai Yulan gradually understood what was going on. Her eyes, which were separated by thin strands of hair, suddenly shone brightly. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.